Hello, and thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to a highly fixated review of large, dense books, specifically the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts.
My name is Cody.
And today we are going to be discussing chapters 22, 23, and 24, Bleeding Edge. We do not have Will or Luke with us this week. Luke should be back next week, and Will should be back next week as well. Isn't that right?
Yes, I believe.
Yeah.
Next week will be everybody back together.
But for now, it's just going to be the two of us. What did you think of chapters 22, 23, and 24, Cody?
I really enjoyed them. I was thinking about this earlier today and how I would kind of phrase it, and it's kind of the last few chapters, I would even say maybe the last 5 or 6 chapters have been a sort of, on the drive through the plot of this book have been a sort of deceleration and kind of taking, curves here and there and getting to kind of enjoy the scenery and spend some time with the characters. Not really a whole lot plot wise going on. And then now we've got, our foot's back on the gas and we are barreling back down the road, and there's a lot happening. The writing is tremendous. There's a lot to unpack from in these chapters. It just really, I was very engaged through the whole thing. I didn't realize how quickly I was able to read through it when I went through it the first time, and I ended up going back through it just to see what all I could pull out from going through everything again. Yeah, these were tremendous chapters. I absolutely loved them.
Yeah, I think they're really good too. I think that you get the conclusion of a couple narrative arcs that we've kind of been following along, or at least things that sort of have been hinted at. What Eric Outfield does in the deep web, what the deep web looks like. We get answers to both of those. He finds the website that Maxine kind of asked him to find, and those are kind of, Pynchon sort of renders the deep web more in like a William Gibson Neuromancer style, which is really, really interesting. And I appreciate his usage of that kind of a description. And then, we also get the conclusion, of course, of like what's going to happen when Maxine and Windesk come back across one another. And, the kind of repeated references of that character in Maxine's monologue over the past couple chapters. So we get some hooks that get some resolution, and then it sort of is like almost a consolidating of the plot. Like things are becoming tighter and tighter as far as these different strands that Maxine has found and is potentially looking into, and it's all done with a great amount of real life references as usual, but also like some really, really effective writing, and really, really effective writing where it is difficult not to write exploitatively.
Yeah,
which we'll get to, I think, in the scene that I'm referring to.
Yeah.
Very, very good stuff, though. All around. No notes, Pynchon. So starting in chapter 22, if I can go back to that far in my book here, Maxine starts by receiving a strange phone call in the middle of the night. This comes after she was last thinking about wind dust. And on the other side, I also love, like, before we even get to what is on the other side of the phone, I love that her answer is, "You don't have all the evidence."
Yeah.
This is what apparently she says so often that's the first thing that comes to mind when she wakes up in the middle of the night. Whether or not that's referring to someone accusing her of, doing something wrong, whether it's her trying to tell somebody extorting a client that they don't have all the evidence, or potentially like some mystery third thing, I'm just very curious why this is the phrase she keeps coming back to. But it turns out that Eric is calling her at 3 a.m. and it turns out that he rather has a lead on what the website she might be looking at may be. So as a result, Eric also mentions that Reg sent him a severance check, but that the two of them haven't talked to each other in a while. And Maxine decides to go over to his place and check it out. And this is where we get to their descent into the deep web. This takes no time to show up in these chapters. It's literally the second page of 22. So the action is pretty fast moving here. How do you feel about the depiction of the deep web in this book?
I really liked it. I am not as familiar with the kind of cyberpunk genre as I would like to be. I read Neuromancer a long time ago. I need to reread it. So I remember parts of that, and I definitely got that vibe. I more recently read Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson, which has a lot of the same kind of vibes and description of this kind of stuff, and so I was kind of reminded of that as well. But I mean, it's if nothing else, it's another just tremendous example of Pynchon's ability to show us what is going on, what the characters are experiencing, and what they're doing. I've always thought one of his strongest points as a writer was his just ability to craft scenery, and in a really engaging way, not in a way that feels boring or just kind of tacked on. And it's very much the writer's mantra of show don't tell. He is absolutely doing that, and with no again, to circle back to everyone's disdain for this book, I can't understand where that comes from with writing like exists in these chapters, and this scene in particular is a prime example of how skilled of a writer he still is at this point in his career.
Yeah, 100%. The way that their sort of descent into the deep web is presented is really great, where it says, presently they're linked and slowly descending from wee hours Manhattan into teeming darkness, leaving the surface net crawlers busy overhead, slithering link to link, leaving behind the banners and pop-ups and user groups and self-replicating chat rooms, down to where they begin cruising among co-opted blocks of address space with cyber thugs guarding the perimeters, spammer operation centers, video games one way or other deemed too violent or offensive or intensely beautiful for the market as currently defined. And then Eric makes a mention that there's some great foot lover websites.
Of course he does.
But then it goes on here and says, it surprises Maxine how populated it is down here in the sub-spider country. Adventurers, pilgrims, remittance folks, lovers on the run, claim jumpers, skips, fugue cases, and a high number of inquisitive entrepreneurs. Among them Promomon, who Eric introduces her to. His avatar is an amiable geek, square-rimmed glasses, wearing a pair of old-school sandwich boards that carry his name, as do those of the curvaceous coadjutor Sandwich Girl. Her hair literally flaming, a polygon-busy gif of a bonfire on top of a manga-style sub-teen face. And I think the really awesome part about those two paragraphs isn't just the incredibly high-quality writing. That's obviously a huge factor of what makes them so good. But it's also that in the first paragraph, nothing that he writes there couldn't still apply to literally opening up a web browser.
Mhm.
Like all of his actual choice of sentences and words there still would apply if someone was just going on Google or doing the deep web equivalent of that. And it isn't until literally the last couple sentences of the second paragraph where you realize that it is actually a completely 3D space that they're walking around in, just like Deep Archer was, 20 chapters ago or however long it was at this point in the book.
Yeah.
And it just that slow reveal, slow process to understanding of the reader is really great. And I wanted to ask if you had any particular thoughts as to why he chose to model it as a virtual reality space rather than just a web interface. Even though the book is in 2013, it makes or was written in 2013. It makes sense that people like William Gibson or Snow Crash guy Neal Stephenson decided to go with these sort of 3D virtual reality spaces. They didn't know necessarily what it was going to be like at that point, that it was actually feasible to be that online, whereas Pynchon is decidedly making it that way, even though he's writing it from a future where that's sort of been proved not realistic.
Yeah, and I think it's a very deliberate choice to do that, and it's one that could easily have not been as effective. I think that the issue I have where this could have gone wrong is when you do that, especially nowadays, or at least post the internet being a very common and more well known and experienced kind of thing. To make it or to present it in that style can be very schlocky if it's not done carefully and in a thoughtful way. But I think that because he does it like that, because he possesses the skill set to do that, he made the choice to do that. I think because it makes it more engaging for us as a reader, it I think it really is showing us how, again, just as Maxine did when she went into Deep Archer, how engrossing and enveloping this situation can be, especially at this time when the internet in 2001 was still kind of a new thing, and it wasn't an everyday thing like we have now, where it's, people are connected 24/7. To have this kind of access at this time in history is essentially you're just immediately going into this rabbit hole, and it is a sort of more all-encompassing experience. And I think that that's exactly why he's doing this, is to show us that, Maxine is, from the outset of her getting into this website, she is just immediately consumed and into this world, to the point that whatever is outside in reality is gone and doesn't really exist there anymore, because she's now in this area, this world.
Yeah, I think that's really good thought on it that I hadn't necessarily considered, but it does make sense, especially in light of like how kind of engrossed she was in Deep Archer to the point where she lost track of time in that section earlier in the book. What I really pulled out of his choice to render this space as sort of reality is also, I'm going to go back to Mason and Dixon here, and back to the description of land management, land ownership, land development through that book, whether it's Dixon, like, wanting to kill the land developer the minute that guy shows up, or more importantly later in the book when Mason wants to go through the warrior's path, and then instead he sees this vision of the future and how the land's going to be populated and despoiled. And as a result of that, especially with the internet and the deep web being kind of described as land, not just in these passages, as far as like claim jumpers and all of the like unsettled land off to the west that Eric mentions in this section of the book, is making that case that this is the same frontier that is. It's as much of a real physical space as the actual earth and the land that we've dwelled on for so long is. It may look a little bit different, it may operate differently, but it still has the same value and impact on real world events, real people, real society, as the actual ground we're on is. And so kind of going through, especially with some of the stuff that happens later, especially with one particular character, it seems that Pynchon rather, through Maxine, is trying to give the reader this impression that like eventually real life is just going to be the internet and connectivity, and this is where everything is going to be done at. It's gonna be something germane, like going through pages or whatever in real life, but what you effectively are doing is walking up to a store and purchasing something from that store, or going to work at a different place on, a different street, so to speak, a different address, as we use those terms for. And that's really, I think, to me, the reason why he chooses to set it in a virtual reality environment rather than just they clicked on the Onion Skin router page to launch Tor and
stared at a screen.
Yeah, so on and so forth. Beyond the obvious, like, literary element of it's more interesting to read this way.
Yeah, and everything. I agree with everything that you said, and it's definitely evident, in the coming sections, on like starting on page 241, where it is, we're seeing the internet is more of a sort of real estate opportunity in a sense. And yeah, it absolutely, I think I'm curious because, he's writing this at a time where in the mid 2000s you started having the rise of alternate reality games that were tying into different media, which is a really interesting way of doing that, and it really can add a whole different layer of immersion and experience for that, whatever that media is that you're partaking in, that tied to the ARG. But I think this is a good example of that gone awry, and that is essentially where we're heading, to the point where we've moved everything from the physical world into the digital world, and now the opportunities to exploit people is able to take place in a different level.
Yeah, in a different way. Yeah, definitely. It's a really cool choice by Pynchon. I'm glad he made it. Because while he can't necessarily be called prophetic for making that decision in 2013, it has only gotten worse in the wake of
Yeah,
this publishing.
yeah,
That's for sure. There's another brief mention here of somebody named Robert Moses in a quote that says, "It isn't a promising neighborhood. If there was a Robert Moses of the deep net, he'd be screaming, 'Condemn it already!'"
yeah.
Um, for those of you who don't know, Robert Moses was a pretty major historical figure in the development of New York City. He in the 20th century, he was one of the most powerful, influential people in the city, and is more or less solely responsible for shaping what our modern conception of New York is, as far as how it looks, how you get in and out of it, the neighborhoods, and all of that. He
And
was
even
he was
beyond that rippled out
Yeah,
to pretty much
100%.
every major city in the country, in the world even.
100%. He worked in the government in New York for 40 years, but never in any elected offices. All of his titles that he received, he either created. All of his jobs he either created or required no elections to get them. There were times in his tenure where he had as many as 12 titles, 12 jobs, or 12 offices at once, as far as what he was doing. He controlled millions of dollars in public funds and taxes from New York City that he would use to commonly fund projects by issuing bonds out of. Like, this man was just issuing government bonds on his own
Yep.
as a way to finance public works projects.
Nothing sketchy
Um,
about that.
no, it's crazy that no one stopped for a second. Was like, wait a second, what is this? What is this Triborough Bridge Authority
They're
bonds?
they were all making money. Why are they going to stop him?
That's true. Um, he oversaw the building and construction of Jones Beach State Park, the New York Parkway System, the Triborough Bridge, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, the Throgs Neck Bridge, and several interstate highways that led out of New York. That's just a chunk of a list of things that he oversaw or planned the building of. After the Triborough Bridge was built, he created something called the Triborough Bridge Authority that he put himself in charge of, and he had virtually unchecked control of all of the tunnels and bridges in New York City, including the tollway funds collected from people driving on them. Um, as a result of that, he then was able to issue bonds, like I've already mentioned, but then also use that tollway fund to, actually put forth funding for other stuff that he wanted to do, and then he would just kind of repeat this cycle like over and over again.
Hmm.
Um, as a result of this, and the specific reason why this mention of like condemn it already is there, he was majorly responsible for destroying ginormous amounts of tenement housing in New York, and just sweeping them all out to build rent-controlled housing or public housing projects that the previous people, who were largely black and brown people of different minorities, could no longer afford the rent on. And as a result of that, he was able to create very distinct neighborhoods with all of the previous clearing out that he had done of these different tenements. And it sort of had the knock on effect of like changing the footprint of the city as far as like what was where, where certain people congregated at, where people lived, and bounced a lot of people out, which is a big part of, Pynchon's writing, not just in New York, in Bleeding Edge, but also in LA and Inherent Vice. There's the whole part
Hmm.
about Channel View Estates and how that's just like the newest thing in a long list of developments like that. And then obviously everything in Mason and Dixon is pretty indicative of the same kind of thing. Um, he was so popular and so beloved by the people who were in housing and urban development, city planning, all of that, that basically his methodology, like Cody mentioned, spread through the entire country as far as how to shape cities and urban areas. He hated public transit and he was just a big bridgehead and was a real big fan of building highways and stuff. So as a result, New York became a lot more car dependent than it used to be. And then because of the fact that so many people liked his methodology for building cities, the rest of the country became very are dependent. So if you ever want to know who to blame, or at least a large percentage of the reason why there's such little options for public transit in cities in America, you can blame Robert Moses for that
Yep.
one. um, so that's just one reference that Thomas Pynchon makes in this section. The two of them sort of continue to go through these different neighborhoods of the deep web. It's very clear that Eric is sort of guiding her through the streets, so to speak, in order to finally bring her to an area of eastern Long Island, where it says the room has a familiar look, austere and unmerciful. She is visited by one of those rogue hunches. Eric, how did we get into this one? A brief tap dance over the keyboard and they're in. If it isn't one of those underground rooms she saw on Montauk, it'll do. The ghosts here are more visible. Strata of tobacco smoke hung unstirred in the windowless space. So suddenly, she finds herself back in the same place that was below the catacombs, so to speak, of Gabriel Ice's home. This is a really interesting section. There's a reference here where it says that access to the computer systems in this room is limited to properly cleared individuals attached to ADC from AFOSI Region 7. These acronyms do correspond to very real things. One of them is the
Aerospace Defense Command.
Yes, and then the other one is the U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which is a real mouthful.
Yeah.
Aerospace Defense Command existed during the sort of last couple of years of World War II. Was closed up. When it was reopened in 1951, its headquarters were actually on Long Island. It didn't stay there, but it was there. Then eventually they moved out to Colorado. And in 1981, it was folded into NORAD. So the ADC, by the time this book takes place and now in modern era, no longer exists. But they did at one time have a government base on Long Island where all of this stuff was headquartered. The ADC and now NORAD, it's basically missile watch and aerospace monitoring. So if the government was going to be involved in 9/11, they would need to have the ADC wrapped into it, and they would need to either plan something out of the ADC or at least pay them off, or close up their ability to access what they were doing or understand what was being plotted. And it would make sense that you would use a former airbase on Long Island in order to traffic planes and aerospace monitoring. And there's that big radar dish. So clearly, what Pynchon is doing here is setting up that this is what this base back on Long Island is. In real life, on 9/11, NORAD was actually involved in an exercise that had deployed fighter jets to northeastern America on 9/11. So there is also a history of this particular government agency, as it's now known, actively doing random shit on 9/11 with planes. There's a whole conspiracy rabbit hole that you can jump down as it relates to that. I'm not making a value judgment on whether or not that is real or not, but it is true that NORAD was running exercises using fighter jets, not passenger planes, in the northeastern United States on the day that 9/11 took place. Then the interesting thing with the usage of the OSI is they would be involved once again, like the need to pay off NORAD. They would be involved in this because they investigate anything that happens that involves the aerospace of America as far as criminality goes. So they would have to be looped into the conspiracy or paid off in some way. The weirdest thing, though, is that there is no Section 7 or Region 7 of the OSI. There's Regions 1 through 6 and 8.
That's the weird thing. Is that it doesn't just stop at 6. It just skips 7.
And you could just go to the OSI's website and it's there, where it tells you exactly like the location and phone numbers and like the rest of the contact information for regions 1 through 6 and 8 are, and there's no entry for 7. And if you go onto like Wikipedia, same thing. It says what regions 1 through 6 and 8 are. Why? I just have to wonder if you're like you're like some sort of secret special super deep state like conspiracy level stuff with the government or the military, Why that? Why
You gotta do
choose?
better.
Why choose? Yeah, like everyone's gonna know that there is a 7.
Yeah.
Why would you have 8? What did you need the extra number for? Um, it's just it's very silly to me that you would do that. Uh, then we get a description of what's going on in this base, or at least Eric kind of gives his impression of what kind of comes out of this base, and he talks about how it is used by this very very deepest of the deep, covered up intelligence community stuff, where they kidnap young boys, abuse them in some way, uh, mind control them, hypnotize them into becoming servants for this agency, and then they're sent back in time to do strategic kills to edit history, and that this all kind of sprouted out of MK Ultra. And then there's a brief sort of aside on MK Ultra, which if you're reading Pynchon and you don't know what MK Ultra is, I don't know how that's the Venn diagram that you've ended up in. Um, it feels almost like a prerequisite to know about MK Ultra to get into his work. But uh, Cody, do you want to give like a brief overview of what MK Ultra was? Because this would be a
So
9-hour podcast if we tried to explain
yeah,
what. Like,
yeah. In a very loose sense, MK Ultra was a known government program. I don't remember when it became like declassified information,
in
but
the 80s
80s
was when
sounds right.
when it was announced, I think, and then like the papers were available, I think, in the 90s.
Yeah. So it ran for 20 years between 1953 and 1973. Basically, the government and more specifically the CIA was using human test subjects to conduct experiments in brainwashing and what essentially was torture, like psychological torture. They were plying people with drugs. They were using electrotherapy, or not like electroconvulsive devices, sensory deprivation, actual physical abuse, straight up torture. Like that legitimately was what was happening. They were conducting these experiments for a number of reasons, none of which you can really justify in any way, shape, or form. These were American test subjects. They were not consenting in the sense that they did not know what they were actually signing up for. And it ran a pretty wide range of people. Like they weren't really targeting a specific group of people. It was pretty much anybody that they could get their hands on and conduct their experiments on.
What's even
And
creepier about that is that a lot of the times it wasn't being directed through the CIA. It was being directed through like different like field offices of other
yeah,
like branches of the government, or in some cases just like random police departments. Like
yeah.
it was all CIA people, but not necessarily always at the directive of the CIA or within the CIA's walls.
And I mean, it reached enough people to where there are well-known people in society who claim to or have been confirmed to have been a part of it. Allen Ginsberg was one.
The Unabomber.
Who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Ken Kesey.
Ken Kesey, yeah.
He was one of them. Jim Jones, I think, at one point said he had he was involved in it. Same with the Unabomber and
Yep.
Charles Manson and a bunch of other people. So yeah, it's a horrific part of American history that truly a lot of people just don't know about. In all honesty, I didn't really know much about it other than the name until I started really getting into Pynchon. And that led me down that rabbit hole. If for some reason you are not fully aware of what this is, I would really encourage that you go do even just like a surface level review of it, because it does play a huge part in a lot of Pynchon's work. I mean, we've talked about it before on here, and when we eventually get to Gravity's Rainbow, boy howdy will we talk about it a lot. So it's it's insane that something like this went on, and for 20 years went on. It's just astonishing, and it's the inclusion of it here. The fact that they're specifically using kids is just even worse. And we find out later, a specific character who may or who was involved in it, and it yeah, this was a tough part to read, just knowing that they're putting kids through this.
Yeah, and now we get to the reason why I brought up like Operation or Project Monarch and like the Montauk Project and all that from the earlier part. As a brief aside on MK Ultra, there are some aspects of it that were voluntary, like Ken Kesey volunteered for the LSD experiment that he was a part of. But that was very minor. A lot of it was not volunteer basis.
No.
One of the most interesting one of the most interesting aspects of it to me, as far as just like that's insane that the government did that and then was like, yeah, we did that later on in history, was Operation Midnight Climax. Um, just to read you some of the Wikipedia on this, it says Operation Midnight Climax was established in order to study the effects of LSD on non-consenting individuals. Prostitutes on the CIA payroll were instructed to lure clients back to the safe houses, where they were surreptitiously plied with a wide range of substances, including LSD, and monitored behind one-way glass. The prostitutes were instructed in the use of postcoital questioning to investigate whether the victims could be convinced to involuntarily reveal secrets. The victims were sometimes fed subliminal messages in an attempt to induce them to involuntary actions, including criminal activities such as robbery, assault, and assassination. Many of the CIA operatives involved in the experiments voluntarily indulged in the drugs and prostitutes for recreational purposes. Additionally, information from Wilmington News Journal on October 15th, 1978 reports from a FOIA request that, quote, the spy agency purchased 2 pounds of yohimbine hydrochloride by Dr. Robert V. Lashbrook, the chief aide to Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. The role of Dr. Lashbrook was to monitor and approve materials for Operation Midnight Climax. Senate investigators were told that the goals of these experiments were to study mind control and sexual behavior, more specifically to learn about the secrets of brainwashing to gain control over enemy spies and protect U.S. agents. Other objectives included finding drugs that could incapacitate entire buildings via poisoned food, which would create confusion, anxiety, and fear, and other symptoms such as headaches and earaches. These drugs could also have amnesia effects, which were intended for use on foreign spies following interrogations and retiring CIA agents. Another aspect they tested was the effect of combining LSD and isolation, where the subjects would be dosed and isolated for months at a time with minimal food and water. So yeah, that's just one thing that makes up a portion of MK Ultra. It's pretty crazy.
It is absolutely wild. I did want to say the time travel, the mention of have the sort of grim reality of time travel in this situation. I really like that inclusion. The idea of time travel, I think, is so often presented as I don't want to say a low stakes thing, because it generally there is some stakes in there, but it's not really often depicted as being as rigorous as it is here. The only really good example I could think of that was the movie Primer, which if people listening have not seen, is a fantastic, maybe the best movie regarding time travel that I've seen. And the characters in there, much like this, there is a meticulous level of planning that has to go into how they're setting everything up, because there within the movie, there's a 5 or 6 hour window of time in which the person who is doing the time traveling and their duplicate will exist in the same space. And so they have to constantly monitor their activities and know where everybody is at the exact times, so that they're not crossing paths with their doubles, and it all just really falls apart. But it's a really cool depiction of how just really brutal time travel could be. So if you haven't seen that, I would definitely recommend going and checking that out.
Yeah, so all of that stuff that we talked about in earlier episodes about Monarch and Montauk and all of that, that's what they're really getting into as far as the meat and potatoes of that conspiracy theory, is that one project kidnaps the people and then breaks them and gives them DID. That's Monarch. And then they're transferred over to Montauk, where they're trained to be sort of assassins and to go through and sort of edit history in terms of supporting the elite and the conspiracy that sort of lies at the heart of that. Again, this is all like deep internet conspiracy stuff that is more recent in the grand scheme of things. There is no sort of official proof or evidence presented of this, unlike MK Ultra, and some of the sub projects of MK Ultra. But it's another interesting facet of sort of like Pynchon knowing about the real weird stuff, even in the
Yeah.
modern era, and including that in his pages here. This then also gives you an additional theory for what Maxine saw in Gabriel's house, whether or not that is actually the Angel of Death, or if it was potentially just one of these kids that's been kidnapped and turned into a killer, and that's why it has the sort of aura of the Angel of Death. Like that kid may come to kill you if you are deemed a threat by the conspiracy elements of the sort of intelligence agency. So that offers us another explanation there.
Yeah, this is just a fascinating. I love this whole part of this chapter. This is really some fascinating world building that's going on.
There is, yeah, and like a lot of the conspiracy theorists of this will also claim that this is a real world thing, but that the reason there's no proof of it is that in 1972, Richard Helms, the CIA director, who was the CIA director for a very, very long time, ordered all of the project files for the 150 sub projects of MK Ultra destroyed, and so um, this is often a reason given for it, and I like the way that it's being worked into this book because oftentimes Pynchon can really deploy his writing to describe the intelligence community or the government or power at large as like a Lovecraftian force that
Mhm.
is this sort of all-encompassing, really evil thing that exists. And the best way to kind of bring the horror element of it, rather than like the bureaucratic nightmare of a Kafka story, is to bring some of these more like evil elements out of the conspiracy culture and add them in to really add something to the kind of you've stepped out of your depth almost is the way that I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of this stuff is portrayed. And that does create a very effective world building to your point, because Maxine was in this place in real life, would never have thought of any of this. And then
Yeah.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden, when she's given this information by Eric in the deep web, suddenly that is where I think really Maxine is like, oh fuck. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's really a lot more here than I had previously understood. And so I don't think it's all that surprising that the next thing she does is think of Nicholas Windust, where
Mhm.
the only sort of concrete tie she has mentally to this world that she has now accidentally stepped into is this guy. She's the easiest like choice mentally to go to when comparing them. She just wonders if maybe that's how he ended up this way. That he was
Yeah.
taken as a child, was put to work to do all these things, and then grew into the sort of heinous adult. And I love that decision here for the reason I've already said, but also for the dual purposes of this is Maxine trying to justify her attraction to him,
Yep.
which she needs as an older person when compared to like a Frenesi. As we talked about in the previous chapter, where me and Will talked about like the intelligence that Maxine has about her sort of addiction to men in uniform, but also it's technically not that far fetched because of the world that Pynchon is presenting to you. Like it is
Mhm.
entirely possible that that is the case. I don't think it is, but it works on two levels. You can see how it's affecting the fact that she's looking for a justification to see him again for her attraction to him, but it has this additional effect of, well, maybe like, maybe that is how you end up being somebody who destroys the wealth of multiple nations and tears apart the foundation of their economy and their populace. Maybe that only happens if you do get sucked up into this deep state situation. It's really, really, really good writing.
It is, and it adds for the reader, when you initially start reading this and she's kind of trying to justify, maybe Windust is the way he is because he was a part of this, and maybe that's, maybe we can forgive him for the things that he's done because he's a product of the system that created him essentially. And then literally the next paragraph is her just like, no, that's bullshit. Like you can't
Right. Yeah.
You can't let yourself get put into that kind of situation. Like some people are just evil, and they can present themselves as not being that, but they absolutely are. And so this kind of internal conflict that Maxine is going through, like you were talking about with her trying to rationalize and justify her attraction to Windus. This is such engaging reading, on a character level. Like there's so much happening within Maxine that just is palpable.
Yeah, 100%. Which again goes down to why I think that this is one of, if not his best protagonist in any of his books.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Like she's my favorite protagonist of any of his books for sure. And I don't see any other character he's written, main side or otherwise, having that same degree of depth as the way that you just articulated having. Like it's a truly remarkable feat for an author to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And for it not to be just narration.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's perhaps the most impressive thing, is that it is inferred by the reader, as you just articulated. Like you pick up on both of those things if you're doing a close reading and you're paying attention. The author is not just telling you that she feels conflicted or that she feels the need to like justify the shameful attraction she has or whatever. You're able to infer it, and that is the hallmark of what a talented writer Pynchon is, and what a substantive book Bleeding Edge is. Chiko Kakutani says she's very wrong about this book.
Just a little bit. I think she wasn't she the one that coined the Pynchon light term?
I don't know. Maybe.
I think she was.
Kakutani's an odd critic. I could talk for a while about her, but that's not the point of the show.
It's neither here nor there.
So Maxine realizes that she needs to go talk to Sean about it, and she needs to like actually. And it's this moment where, again, I go back to a lot of the conversations like between Will and the rest of us of like, why does she see this guy? And it seems as though for the most part, up until now, she hasn't been seeing him out of much of a sense of like obligation or need. But as soon as she's in a situation that she knows she needs some kind of an actual like guiding hand through, she is very earnest about it. So it almost seems like she's keeping this guy around because he's good for the occasional question, maybe, but for the most part, potentially it's something entertaining for her. It's such a interesting relationship and back and forth that the two of them have.
It really is, and I dove a little into the Lacanian psychology that Sean is clearly tied to, and I think this might answer some of the reason that she goes to him. So essentially, with this style of psychology, the idea is that the unconscious resembles the structure of language, and that the goal of this kind of therapy essentially is to as they describe it in their own kind of writing, to bring the patient to confront the elementary coordinates and deadlocks of his or her desire, and that the patient knows everything and the analyst knows nothing. So I think what Maxine is doing, the specific reason she is seeing this particular psychiatrist who, as readers, we see this guy as a complete inept idiot. Like he just essentially is in this for the money. He got himself a degree and he can make a bunch of, have a bunch of rich clients and, take their money. But she's talking her way through all of this with him. Like he's not really doing anything because she knows everything and she just has to work it out. I think he is sort of a wall off of which she can bounce these ideas and work out these problems herself. And sometimes that's really all therapy is at the end of the day.
Yeah, you just need to like talk to somebody about what your plan or thought process is.
You just have to get it out in words, and sometimes you need the right person to do that with, and Sean is that guy. Yeah. And I think, I can't say for certain. Obviously, that's why Pynchon chose that particular branch of psychology, but it's definitely interesting that there is that connection. Yeah.
You didn't just end up at Lacanian psychology as like a lark.
Yeah, I don't think you're just scrolling through a bunch of them and just like, yeah, that one sounds good. I'm sure there is.
About what I'm looking for.
I just don't want to speak for him, but yeah, it definitely seems like that is a very intentional insertion of that particular branch of psychology.
Yeah, for sure. There's some more interesting historical notes here. We learned that Sean's mentor, the person who kind of brought him up in this style of psychology, where we get the term Lacanian inserted from. We get a line here that says, "From what Maxine can gather, Sean's therapist, Leopoldo, is a Lacanian shrink who was forced to give up a decent practice in Buenos Aires a few years ago, due in no small part to the neoliberal meddling in the economy of his country. The hyperinflation under Alfonsin, the massive layoffs of the Menem Cavallo era, plus the regime's obedient arrangements with the IMF, must have seemed like the law of the father run amok, and after enough of it, Leopoldo came to see too little future in the haunted city he loved. So he gave his practice his luxury suite in the shrink's quarter down in Villa Freud and split for the States." Villa Freud's a real place. That's not actually it's just something that Thomas Pynchon made up for his book. But we get a couple of mentions there. First is Alfonsin, which means Raul Alfonsin. He was the first democratically elected president of Argentina after the Dirty War and the military junta ended. He is pretty important to the history of Argentina because if he got his way, the foreign meddling would have stopped that led to a lot of this in the first place. The stuff that Nicholas Windus was down there supporting for quite a while. He largely was elected because he opposed both sides of the Dirty War. He basically said, like, everyone involved in this is got the blood of Argentina on their hands. Prosecute all of them. And so, to the extent that he was able to do, he did prosecute the junta itself, as far as the leaders, a lot of the people who brought out like the disappearances, and a lot of the really awful sort of military dictatorship that they were responsible for when they were in power. He also pushed through a lot of laws and sort of initiatives to try and figure out what happened to the 30,000 people that got disappeared during the junta's regime. Apparently, also, I don't know if I could speak to this sort of like specifically because I don't know enough about the inner workings of Argentinian politics, but if you read a lot about his reforms, it seemed like the military was like a separate entity from Argentina proper, and certain other aspects of the government of Argentina were kind of in a similar class of separation. And what Alfonsin tried to do and successfully eventually did for, I believe, the whole government's structure was sort of united under the same umbrella, so that these divisions that can lead to civil war in the case of their country that then got blown up by the whole Operation Condor nightmare couldn't happen to them again. He tried to introduce like checks and balances on power as a result of that process as well. He lost re-election because he wasn't able to successfully resolve some labor disputes that occurred between trade unions. And he also was facing rising inflation because he tried pegging a new currency that he created during his time as being worth $1. And this was really the kind of beginning of the end for the reforms that he was trying to do, because it allowed the IMF and the US government to come in and say no and start to really meddle with what he was doing again. And so as a result of that, and a combination of that currency and also raising wages, he gave a bunch of wage raises out to all of the different sort of manufacturing and mining infrastructure in the country that was nationalized. Their inflation just like skyrocketed. And then that led him to need to go to the IMF directly for help with debt relief. And then he loses re-election. The people who come in after him is the president, Carlos Menem, and then the minister of the economy, Domingo Cavallo. These two guys are largely responsible for, if you're looking at this conspiratorially, which I think is completely logical to do, the collapse of Argentina as a socialist country, or a potential socialist country, which again is how all this Operation Condor nonsense that Windus was involved in started in the first place. All that happened is there was a lot of socialist sympathy and like success in South America, and the US government couldn't have that. And so they had to go down there and start messing with everything. And so this guy came in, and he founded like a political thought movement called Meninism, which later was sort of translated into neoliberal ideology, which is why Sean's therapist Leopoldo would call someone a neoliberal as a insult. That's still apparently very real belief in Argentina, that's like a devastating insult to give somebody because of this guy. He came in after Alfonso lost his re-election campaign. He accepted something called the Washington Consensus, which was a legal document put forth by the U.S. government in how to transition your country into a free market capitalist economy. Was basically the easiest way to describe what this was. Um, this started the turn permanently from socialist politics to capitalist free market politics. And as a result of that, Cavallo, his minister of the economy, started privatizing all of the nationally owned industries. He privatized close to 200 national industries. And he worked freely with the IMF through that whole process to reduce inflation, use the money of the private sales to different sort of IMF-backed interests to pay off the country's debt. And then he restructured their monetary fund with a new currency that was going to be pegged to the dollar permanently. So rather than it being $1 is one this, it's $1 or like one of our dollars is equal to whatever the current value of a dollar is. So he structured their whole economy to basically run off of the United States, more or less. And
Wild.
as a result of all of these proceeds from national industries to be purchased, like I said, it seems as though the plan for Argentina came to success. So if you look at it from a standpoint of a timeline, you try to remove the left-wing groups to prevent the spread of popular socialism. That leads to civil wars. Operation Condor and the Dirty War is all of the stuff to look up for that. You get a democratically elected president after that's over. He fails to restructure the company properly because you've rigged him with a bad setup to do so. And
Yep.
then as a result, the IMF comes in to do consultation, offers a helping hand, quote unquote. And then they elect a new president who's willing to play ball because he sees how bad the country is currently as far as a state of concern is. And then he privatizes everything. Now you no longer have a left wing. Now you no longer have a left wing party. You no longer have to worry about left wing mobilization. It's just all over at that juncture. So it's again a case, and this is really why I say that Bleeding Edge is like another Bible rather than sort of another one of his books after Gravity's Rainbow, because there are these individual random references time and time again to these major pieces of history between Gravity's Rainbow and this. Um, and what that really points to, and it's not to say that that's different from the rest of Pynchon's books. They all contain references, but what that leads to is all of these references are really associated to one another as far as the history that they interact with. Some of them are sequential, and it builds a case where all of the stuff that is about to happen in this book is sort of the end result of characters being in the right places at the right times after these things have happened. Nicholas Windust is in the position that he is in because of all of the stuff he did at the behest of the CIA and the IMF and the FBI in South America. And so he's knitting together this larger tapestry of information that shows how all of this leads towards an event like 9/11, where suddenly, as I've said many times on the show, it is a history-breaking event. History's over, and an entirely new paradigm comes in. And we get a lot of that new paradigm in this book through the lens of the digital infrastructure of the world, the deep web infrastructure, the online infrastructure, how it's a new horizon, a new frontier. Things move off of this perfect Edenic landscape that we've despoiled and ruined and fought across for decades and decades and decades until now everyone moves online. Because of 9/11, we can safely track them. We can safely keep them in a little box. We can control the information they have access to. And then we start this whole process over again. But now we have our eyes on it from the very beginning. And that is more or less, again, looking at this sort of case that I'm building towards, the same thing that happens in Argentina. We crack the structure, it's all over. We put them through this horrible prospect. Then we rebuild, but now they're under our watchful eyes and we can protect them, quote unquote. And so I think that is some of, to kind of get into the larger analysis of the book that I've had since we started, some of the reason why I think this is not only his last book, it just doesn't make sense for there to be another one after this. He's not going to be alive long enough, but also from a standpoint of this really being his Gravity's Rainbow or his other Bible for this new age that we're all living in.
It's wild to think how different things could have been if Alphonson had been able to just maintain the economy.
Yeah.
But clearly, it like you said, everything was kind of set up for failure, and that's exactly how these kind of things work. And it's absolutely wild.
100%. And it also gets to why this book operates on two levels really well. You can go down the rabbit hole that I just took the listeners down and talk about its importance as far as like, a book in Pynchon's canon, a book in Pynchon's alternate history of the United States, a book, that has these wider reaching sort of biblical impacts. Or you can also just read it as a brief character note and you can enjoy it both ways.
Yep.
And that is very, very impressive. It also sort of becomes clear that Maxine, in some ways, is looking for a justification to see the guy from her therapist, but he's not playing ball with her, so to speak, and so she kind of just has to threaten to leave his office as a way of like resolving this dispute. And we as you read these pages that she's going to go and see him again. Like, you just know it's going to happen. There's no way that it's not going to happen. She's searching for any possible reason. She's disguising it underneath this kind of like, well, what if he's actually like not that bad? Which Sean directly calls her out on, and it's probably the only valuable contribution Sean has had this entire book. Do you want to read his response to her about him?
You've developed a thing for like Republican war criminals now? Using condoms, I hope. Cute, Sean. Come on, you're not really offended. Not really. Wait a minute. This is a cast iron Buddha here, right? Watch this. Reaching for the Buddha's head, which of course, as soon as she touches it, will turn out to fit her grasp perfectly, as if designed expressly as a weapon handle. In the instant, all unfriendly impulses are calmed. I've seen his rap sheet, trying not to edge into Daffy Duck mode here. He tortures people with electric cattle prods, he pumps aquifers dry and forces farmers off their land, he destroys entire governments in the name of a fucked up economic theory he may or may not even believe in. I have no illusions about what he is. Which is what, some misunderstood teenager only needs to hook up with the right girl who turns out to know even less than he does? Is this high school again? Competing for boys who are going to be doctors or end up on Wall Street, but all the time secretly yearning to run with the dopers, the car thieves, the convenience store badasses? Yes, Sean, don't forget surfers. What, excuse me, gives you authority here? What happens in your practice when you want to save somebody but lose them instead? All I do is try for what Lacan calls benevolent depersonalization. If I got hung up trying to save clients, how much good do you think it would do? A lot? Yes, again. Not so much. Maxine, I think you're afraid of this guy. He's the Reaper. He's on your case, and you're trying to charm your way out of it. Oof. If this isn't the moment to go stomping out the door with a dignified yet unequivocal over-the-shoulder fuck you, well, let me think about that. Maxine's journey in this chapter is it's so good.
Yeah, it is really, really good. And I love that she is aware of how bad this is. And
that's the thing. It's like she's smart enough to see through it, and it's so frustrating because you want, as a reader, you want the best for her, and you know what she's capable of, and you know she's better than this.
Yeah. Sometimes, speaking as a woman, that's just how it is. I can't. No, you just make really bad decisions, even though you know they're bad decisions.
That's true for anybody. I mean, it's just so real. Like there are those things that we have that we inherently know are bad or just not the right thing to do, but we will jump through absolute hoops to allow ourselves to do it.
Like smoking.
Yeah, but it's frustrating when you see a fucking character in a book that does it and you know better. But
yeah, it's such a better rendered version of the Brock and Furnessy thing.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that Brock and Furnessy isn't rendered well. It is, but as we talked about a few episodes ago, it is a difference in maturity level. From Furnessy, when this is happening, is pretty young and has really no concept of what she's doing and like the broader like understanding of it. but Maxine does, and so
Mhm.
you're literally sort of taken along on this kind of interesting ride with her as you watch her go through those hoops that you're talking about. Um, it's especially interesting reading this after reading Vineland.
Yeah.
Obviously, that is technically the chronological order to read them in from the standpoint of time period. Um, but most people obviously don't end up reading it that way. It's a very entertaining way to go through it. As a last note on that Lacanian stuff, benevolent depersonalization in Lacanian philosophy, uh, it's a term that just means like pouring out of the ego. So like
Mhm.
doing your best to reduce the ego of yourself and the other person to help them understand like what the mistake they're making is or the fallacy that they're engaging in. Do you have anything else on chapter 22 that you want to talk about?
I liked the description of Leopoldo is essentially being an ambulance chaser, but as a psychologist, where he's hanging around phone booths just waiting for people to be pissed off so he can like snag him as a client.
It is, yeah. And then he tells them that. I
Yeah.
feel like if I was ever that sleazy of a person, I would not bring up the fact that I did that to somebody.
It really there's a level of gall that he has that I'm kind of impressed by that he can do that and retain
Yeah,
clients.
entirely fair. Going into chapter 23, Brooke and Avi are finally back from their trip over to Israel, and Maxine decides to go and see them. We get a reference to the World Trade Center here. It says, turns out at the moment, Elaine and Brooke are down at the World Trade Center eyeballing the unexplored shopping potential of Century 21. Um, I don't know if, do you think that's a reference to the real estate company, or is this a
That's the
fictional
only thing I could
store
get of it. That
in the
that they're eyeing
world?
some kind of World Trade Center, like a I guess it would be like a suite or something there maybe to set up
Yeah,
shop.
yeah, it's interesting. Ernie's supposed to be at Lincoln Center watching some well-received Kyrgyz movie, but has actually snuck over to the Fast and the Furious at the Sony multiplex.
What a way to
Uh,
date this, because now, like, I
yeah.
felt fucking old reading that.
And that's not even what Fast and Furious is at this point anymore.
No,
Like
no.
for for those who haven't watched all of them, this started out as a movie about people stealing DVD players from delivery trucks.
And family. It's
Uh,
always about family.
Always about family. You can't take that away from it. What else would they be?
Yeah.
We get a reference here to tongue polonaise. This is a pretty not I don't want to say standard. It's a Jewish recipe. It's a known Jewish recipe. Um, I actually think it's quite good. I know that that's probably a controversial opinion amongst a lot of people. Beef tongue is a very good source of protein, and it's got a very unique flavor in a way that is not bad. I'd highly recommend it. We figure out that AV's been hired at Hashlingers, and this is another moment where I wrote paranoia alert with a bunch of
Yep.
exclamation points in the side. And now Hashlingers has turned from this is another clever moment in my mind where Hashlingers in the beginning of the book is described as like this website that that helps with database conversion and database like sorting and all that information. But now Avi says they get a lot of federal work, NSA and so forth, and they've offered me a job. And in fact, I'm starting week after next. Completely different description at this point in the book as far as what
Yep.
Ashlingers does, and just to show that progression of understanding, not just with Maxine and the reader, but just it. Sometimes that is just how these things are spoken about. One day, one thing is this, and the other day, it's the next. Especially in the internet world. Um, you know, it's just such a clever little piece of information to put in there. They're not hiding anymore. It's just like, yeah, we're a defense contractor. Snowden technically didn't work for the NSA.
Yeah.
Snowden technically worked for a technology company called Booz Allen Hamilton. This is how a corporation becomes an inside corp, as they call it. As I talked about with some of the corporations involved with the Iran Contra deal, we were going through the promise information. I also really like the description of their meeting in Haifa, where it says he actually showed up in person in Haifa to recruit me. We did breakfast at a falafel joint in the Wadi Nisnas. or Nisnas. He seemed to know the owner. I told him that I went in for salary benefits, and he said, okay, no handling. Tahini all over his shirt. Just a regular guy. Exactly. I like this description because at first I thought to myself, like, oh, that's funny. Like, Gabriel Ice isn't able to eat tahini without getting it all over himself. Um, and the obvious, like, comedic imagery of that. But it's also probably just true. Like, Gabriel
Yeah.
Ice he's just a normal guy who's been turned into this CIA asset, like his wife Talus talks about earlier in the book. And then with March and her husband, they're like, yeah, like he's just a dude. Like he's there. He shouldn't be anything more than just a regular computer programmer. It's just somebody who was sort of picked out of the crowd by the intelligence agencies to be the person to run this whole thing. And that doesn't change the fact that, like, he's not some powerful, interesting businessman. As Will mentioned, it's possible the art in his house he doesn't even own.
Yeah.
So that was probably the first time he ate something with tahini in it. Like he's just a regular guy. I again, it's just one of these like brief asides where like one reading of it is humorous, but again, it makes you think about it. You go, yeah, no, technically, Avi's not even wrong in a different way.
Yeah.
We get another reference to Promise software in this conversation as well, and Maxine asks if he knows what it is. He mentions that they talk about the back door. He also mentions that he wouldn't recognize it at this point. This is all real history. Go back to the episode where I talked about Promise if you want to hear all about that. But it's true. The software that Promise became for those NSA programs that's no need the existence of or anything else. It doesn't look at all like how it used to. It's not even used for nearly the same purpose that it was originally. She also asks him about another sort of way to track people, and he kind of decides that he's done with this conversation at that point. There's also a mention of another recipe here called pitcha. Uh, that's made of cow hoof. I don't exactly know how you get a vegan cow hoof unless
That's a good question.
unless we're assuming that the hoof is vegan because it isn't edible, or at least is not edible by most people.
It's not part of the cow that's meant to be
Right.
consumed.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. I love the description of it though, where it says it's like a three-dimensional Kandinsky, perfect with the tongue. Uh, so they sit down to eat their meat of vegan hoof and beef tongue. And then there's a brief conversation between Maxine and her sister where we get an idea that they're not exactly on the same page, I guess I'll say. They
Mhm.
just sort of had a falling out about life. It's not clear exactly why that's necessarily the case, but there's some real friction between the two of them. And this is a thing that makes me sad every time I read it, because Maxine doesn't seem to have just completely wholesome relationships with anybody.
No,
Like,
she doesn't. And
and yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, this is a really interesting scene because, we're seeing Maxine socialize with, these people who are their family, Avi's family by marriage, but, her relationship with her sister, as you said, is obviously strained, and we're not really given much backstory to it, but it's clear that it bothers her, and that it really makes me curious to know, is there something that happened, along the way in her relationship with her sister or her parents that kind of put her in this position of not being able to really, retain a healthy relationship with most people? Um, it's nothing super detrimental to her, I don't think. She's obviously, was able to get married and have kids and can maintain relationships, but she definitely, there is her main flaw as a character is it's just this inability to, I guess, like, I don't know, like, allow people to criticize her or, just to interact with people on a normal level. Like there always has to be a sort of sense of conflict going on when she's having these interactions with people, and I don't know what drives that necessarily in her, but it's there.
Yeah, yeah, most certainly. And like, yeah, I want Maxine to have some friends.
Yeah.
Like, Maxine, I'll be your friend. Yeah, it's just it's very sad. I don't really have much analysis beyond what you've already mentioned, but like, you know, if people believe my theory about her husband, then that means that she was married to an abusive husband. Her best
Mhm.
friend routinely takes the people that she's interested away from her or criticize the people that she's interested in. She's got a strained relationship with her sister. Her parents openly disliked her husband, which is another piece of evidence to point to the fact that he was
Yep.
abusive. Um, she meets this guy Eric one time and has to jerk him off with her feet. Like, it's just, girl, please. Like, I just want you to find some friends. It's just got to be such a lonely existence, I feel like, for her, which is probably why she has this sort of like single-minded pursuit of like the truth and of the need
Mhm.
to like sort out these sort of cases that she gets. It probably is a big reason why she's the kind of investigator that she is, or the kind of like self-possessed person that she is.
Definitely.
We get in the next scene, um, we get a visit from the owner of Yenta Espresso, which seems to confirm the idea that this is just sort of a bordello or a sort of prostitution
Mhm.
headquarters of some kind. And we get the idea that Nicholas Windust has been by the office, wearing some very interesting shoes. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
high
looked
three
him up.
figures, Edward Green snakeskin, approximately enough. You looked
Yeah.
these up, huh?
I did. The cheapest things they have on their website are $685. They only make about 250 pairs of shoes a week. They're all handmade. They're very high quality. But yeah, they range from 685 to 2,650. So, Windust has money, clearly, which is interesting because we see him, or he's presented in this scene dressing, in very expensive clothing, and then when we meet up with him later, pretty much the opposite of that.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, he does own like a small nation's worth of economic
Yeah,
stuff from his time carving
that's
up South America with the IMF.
that's true.
So he's wearing some nice shoes. Um, and then basically immediately after this interaction, Nicholas Windust calls, and basically the two of them set up a date. And yes, you are correct. His outfit for the date is interesting. Do you want to read it?
Yeah. Windust seems to think it's a date. He is done up, otherwise inexplicably, in somebody's idea of hipster gear. Jeans, vintage sharkskin sport coat, purple drank t-shirt, enough dress code violations to get him thrown off the L train. Maxine peers at this for as long as you have to, shrugs. It's a look.
It is
It
a
is
look.
very much that.
Yeah. I at first for some reason I thought that aubergine t-shirt meant like a t-shirt with a eggplant on it, but I it's just a purple shirt in that shade
Yeah.
of purple. But for a while when reading it this time around, before my mind made the correct assumption, I was imagining that he just had a t-shirt with a picture of an aubergine on it, and that was somehow a part of his ensemble here.
I mean, that would be pretty damn funny.
Yeah, it would be really
Especially because
something.
that's before the emoji era, so this should just be some dude with an eggplant on his fucking shirt.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And once again, there's a lot of good internal monologue back and forth, interspersed
Mhm.
with the dialogue of Maxine, like just feeling shameful for what she's doing. Um, just some Chemet from H&M, but how nice of you to notice. And what is this with the getting cute here? Stop, Maxine. When will you? And then before she can finish the thought, he interrupts with him speaking. Um, I also really like the quote here from Windustry says, "Play dumb if you like, but I ran a search on you. You're the little lady who sent Jeremy Fink up the river. Busted the Manlapan Ponzoids gang over in Jersey. Went down to the Grand Cayman disguised as a reggae backup singer. Firebombed 10.5 billion in physical Swiss francs and exfiltrated in the perp's own Gulfstream jet." None of that stuff is real. However, a search for Ponzi schemes and Mana Plan did come back with a lot of results. There have been a lot of financial crimes in Mana Plan.
Yeah.
So it at least makes sense as far as a choice for Pynchon to make. But I like this particular line because I think it's making it clear why Windust likes her. That rather than it being like a Brock and Furnessy thing where Brock is just sort of attracted to what he should hate, and that kind of relationship has the vice versa. This relationship is two people who are equally sort of very good at what they do, and that is part of the attraction that the two of them have. The reason why Windust probably feels the need to continue to kind of integrate with her both professionally and later physically is because of this sort of, I guess, admiration would be the best way to describe that he has for her career history and her abilities.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of in a way doing the same conceptual work on different scales and on opposite sides of morality, I guess. You know, she's responsible for bringing down these sort of low level crime syndicates and, you know, catching these fraudsters and whatnot. And he on the other side is propping up these, you know, banana republics and these dictators in South America and causing these widespread atrocities to take place as a result of those actions. So it's a really interesting dynamic that exists between the two of them, and I like that comparison to Brock and Furnessy because I think that's definitely kind of in the back of my mind as I read this, is, you know, partially because we just finished Vineland, but also because that very much there is that sort of parallel between the two, just a little bit more of a I guess it's a little more fleshed out, more well rounded in these two characters.
Yeah, certainly. What Windust is really looking for is for proof as to whether or not Avi is a Mossad sleeper agent, just like you brought up in their previous interaction. But it is interesting to note that inside his briefcase is a bunch of his underwear, and like changes of clothes, and that's where he gets this file out for Maxine, and also that he's dressed in a very unofficial manner when compared to the last time they met. He was very official, very above board. He had a business card he handed her, and now all that's out the window. Now you could be forgiven for just thinking that it's a case of like, you know, he's off the clock, so to speak, or he's incognito mode or whatever. But that doesn't explain why he has underwear in a briefcase that Maxine describes him living out of. And in my conspiracy corner is related to my understanding of the Nicholas Windust character, which you can go back to a couple of episodes ago to when I articulated what the bus dream that she has with him is. But in my mind, this is when Nicholas Windust has kind of stopped working for the government. Like, going back to my understanding of the character, and spoilers for anybody, just like fast forward a couple minutes to when I'm done talking. Um, you know, he has figured out that something is happening, has figured out that Hashlingers is engaged in it, and that's why he's freaked out, I think. Then that's why he's trying to like specifically say like, oh, you know, Hashlingers has a lot of government contracts. Like, he seems to be speaking from a far different perspective now, and so I feel like he's found out about the plot. Still can't figure out what it is. He's clearly already shot the video that she's about to watch in the next sort of suite of chapters we'll go through, and is now kind of from the outside trying to figure out where he needs to go next to stop this conspiracy from being carried out. Because again, as I said in the previous sort of conspiracy corner I had on this, he is probably okay with doing all sorts of crimes in Argentina and Guatemala, but is not okay with the same thing being done on the U.S. soil. It's against what he understands the kind of American project or belief system to be, and so now he's still obsessively attempting to kind of get after it. And if you want to go like even further, in my comparison between him and John O'Neill, John O'Neill was fired from the Bureau for misplacing his briefcase. So we have a briefcase connection as far as an indication of where his employment status may be at. So that feels more like potentially grasping at straws. But I do believe that at this point we see a Windust who has transitioned to fighting against the conspiracy that he maybe was previously a part of or hadn't been aware of yet, and was just concerned about Avi from just a security perspective rather than a specific attack perspective.
Yeah, it definitely there's an air of desperation that seems to surround him at this point, because he's definitely you don't just haul around a suitcase with underwear and shaving supplies just cuz. Like, you're
Right.
absolutely living out of that, or you're you know not planning on being in one place for very long, and you just need to have a few things till you get to the next point in your destination. So yeah, it's really interesting to see the this kind of paranoid shift that occurs within him, that he's trying to get away from whatever it is that's happening, or stop whatever's happening from happening.
Yeah, definitely.
I will say the earlier mention of the Ponzi schemes and Manipon and all that. I was initially looking that up, just kind of like you mentioned, to see, and I found all the stuff that existed about that area. I did also find a really cool article that was written by a Richard Hardak, and I'll have a link to this in the show notes. It's a really interesting examination of how black markets work, and specifically tying into Gravity's Rainbow and Bleeding Edge. I haven't gotten through the whole thing yet, so I don't really want to get too into the woods on it, but it's a really interesting read. And there's a lot of it adds a lot of interesting context to how the black market is sort of used in both of those books, and how it manifests itself as almost as a side character in a sense, and its function within both of those stories.
Yeah, I did not get a chance to read it. It's very long.
It is very long. That's why I haven't finished reading it yet. But it's really interesting. So yeah, like I said, I'll have a link to it in the show notes for anyone who's interested in it.
After this sort of meeting, Maxine takes the folder that he gives her, and then goes back to her office. But there's a great moment here when Windust turns things flirtatiously, where he says, "Am I making you nervous?" And then suddenly the sort of conversation goes down a different pathway for Maxine. And I really love the description here of, here, maybe this will be easier. Writing something on a napkin in a more wholesome, or maybe only earlier era, it might have been the name of a good restaurant or an idea for a startup. Today, the best you can call this is an invitation to step into an airheadedness and error. A dress inconvenient to the subway, she notices. Say about rush hour, better chances for invisibility. That work for you? Among many things she hasn't picked up before is this note in his voice. Demanding, not what you'd call especially seductive, and yet still not a deal killer. And that would that have to be, she wonders. What would that have to be, she wonders. He gets up, nods, and splits, leaving her with a check, after saying he'd pay for it. What is she thinking again? Um, I love that description. It's just one of many examples of how good of a writer he is that we bring out in every episode of this show that we do. But just like the whole description of it, from her obvious shame that she has over this whole thing developing,
Mm-hmm.
but still the interest that she can't really get over. And then I love that depiction of like writing something on a napkin in a more innocent age would have been something more innocent. That like, and that again, maybe this is reading too much into it, but spiraled out to what this book sort of represents in the time frame that it sort of represents. Like, everyone's just kind of living in hell, and something as simple as
Yep.
writing down like an address or a phone number on a napkin is no longer something seen as like the possibility of a startup, or these different examples that Pynchon gives of like a good reason that you'd receive something off of a napkin, but is now instead this thing that is only shameful and hard to work through, and that while you may enjoy, is really killing you.
Yeah, and she just still can't get away from her better judgment, and understand what's going. He leaves her with a check and just fucks
Yeah.
off, and she
Yep.
still is like, "Well, I don't know."
And then I also love the appearance of Conkling here at the end of the chapter, specifically
Mhm.
the line, "As if he's a kindly angel bringing a last chance to act responsibly."
Yeah.
Like, this is my last out, because he shows up. First, he smells the same cologne that was around when Lester got killed, which means that it's
Mhm.
possible that Windust killed him, or that Windust was present when he was killed. Um, and Maxine talks about how, oh, it's just a guy that I used to go to college with, and he's just in from DC, and not that big of a deal. Um, and she has another one of these moments of like, you know, was he just like an innocent little boy that got caught up in something that he didn't mean to get caught up in? The description of how she connects the cologne to like his innocence is really, really beautifully done. It's not your quote, is it?
I don't think it is.
Okay,
Let
do
me
you want to
double
read
check.
it?
Yeah,
Her
I
thoughts
got it
go
right here.
wandering off.
Her thoughts go wandering off, and nobody tries to summon them back. Did Windust, once in a more sympathetic juvenile day, actually hang out at the old 930 Club the way Maxine did at the Paradise Garage? Maybe on stateside breaks from doing evil all around the world. Maybe he caught Tiny Desk Unit and Bad Brains in their local band period. Maybe the smell of 930 cologne is his last, his only link with the uncorrupted youth he was. Maybe Conkling is coming down with a seasonal allergy and his nose is a little off today. Maybe Maxine is sliding deeper into a sentimental idiocy attack. Maybe he's ass, okay? Circumstantial, schmircumstantial. Windust was there when Lester was taken out, and maybe he even did it. Damn.
It's really good. And then
It really is.
the paragraph after that, where she brushes off the fact that he's there to like be concerned about the fact that Heidi won't talk to him anymore, and then she goes home and gets herself ready for him. Like,
Yep. It's so frustrating.
like, I hate it. I hate it so much, but it's
Yeah,
so fucking well written.
it really
Just
is.
yeah, just this somehow she finds herself home and immobile in front of the bedroom closet, wondering why her mind has gone this blank. Polyvinyl chloride, something in bright red perhaps, though not inappropriate, is somehow absent from the inventory. Jeans are out of the question too. At length, deep in at the event horizon of the closet oblivion, she notices a chic cocktail hour suit in a subdued aubergine shade, discovered long ago at the Galleries Lafayette going on a business sale and kept for reasons that probably don't include nostalgia. She tries to think of ways in which Windus might read it. If he reads it, if he doesn't just grab and start ripping. Repeated messages from her vertex, or does she mean vortex of femininity piling up unanswered? It's just, Maxine.
Mhm.
It's just so bad. And then the fact that fucking Conkling is what gives her the justification to go over there. Like
Yeah,
it's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but the fact that
yeah,
she mentions like, oh well, now this is work. And because of the fact that we've seen her go to Eric Outfield and engage in that in order to get information, we know that this is something
yep,
she's okay doing. And so that is what finally pushes her over the edge. We're like, oh yeah, I can just do what I want now. And the fact that it comes from the guy she was supposed to be dating, like,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
it
It's great character work. It really is. Like,
is.
you gotta, you gotta let the characters go where they're gonna go and do what they're gonna do. As
Yeah,
frustrating as it can be for us as readers, like this is how Maxine would behave. This is exactly in line with her character.
yeah,
And I love the fact that the mention of the 930 Club, I think, is really cool for anyone who's not aware. It's a club in DC that it has a lot of history with a lot of really cool bands. And the two that are mentioned here, Tiny Desk Unit, I was not familiar with. I've been listening to them all week, and it's great. They only have like one album and one live album that I can find, um, but it's really good stuff. But Bad Brains, if you haven't listened to Bad Brains, you need like take the week and just start going through the discography.
take the week and just listen to all of it.
It's so like if you're a fan of especially like early hardcore punk, and then with Tiny Desk Unit, one of the live album I found was from the 930 Club, so that
Yeah,
added a nice little layer of it. But that was, I don't know how that band slipped under my radar. That was a good listen.
they're great. Yeah, very much so. Another one of those DC acts that's just kind of forgotten about.
Hmm.
Anything else from chapter 23 that you want to talk about?
No, I don't think I have anything.
Starting with chapter 24, Maxine is headed to an address in Hell's Kitchen, which is appropriate given the company that she's about to keep. Only Daredevil was there to break up their tete-a-tete.
If only.
There's a great quote that opens up the chapter that you have some notes on, Cody. Do you want to read that chapter? Or
Yeah.
That first paragraph?
I'll read the whole chapter, sure. It's only 8 pages.
Whole thing.
The address is in a far west side piece of Lower Hell's Kitchen among train yard and tunnel approaches, plowed indifferently through a neighborhood whose disconnected fragments have left to survive as they might. Lofts, recording studios, pool table showrooms, movie equipment rental places, chop shops. Wised up real estate mavens of Maxine's acquaintance assure her that this is the next hot neighborhood. Redevelopment is in the air. Someday the number 7 subway will extend over here, and the Javits Center will have its own stop. Someday there will be parks and soaring condos and luxury tourist hotels. Right now, there is still a windswept, hard-to-get region that visitors from other planets arriving in centuries to come after New York has been long forgotten will assume was ceremonial, even religious, used for public spectacles, mass sacrifices, lunch break. So this is referring to the Hudson Yards development project, which, interestingly, didn't start development until December of 2012. So right around the time that he would have been wrapping this book up. And as of right now, when I check this, they have a planned completion of 2027. There's a lot of interesting things that they have been trying to put in this part of New York for a long time. This goes back to like the 50s. They were going to build something called a Freedom Tower that would have used a conveyor belt to transport people to and from Midtown Manhattan, which is maybe the most 1950s concept for architecture that I might have ever heard.
Yeah.
Like that's some Jetson shit. Just, I mean, I don't know. But the Jets and Yankees also vied for a stadium there. The Jets several times came very, very close to having a stadium in this area. And then they were also in the early 2000s looking at putting an Olympic stadium there. So as it is right now, it's basically they are just building a bunch of high rises for corporations and these kind of headquarters for super wealthy conglomerates. I think Facebook or Meta or whatever the hell they call themselves now has some real estate there and a bunch of other pretty big companies. So it's this was kind of an interesting, almost last minute prescient thing that got put into the book. I think that really kind of shows again this attention to the real estate development and the taking over of all these pieces of land and making them into these places that really no one can afford to live. We're stripping this land away from potential apartment complexes or places for lower income people to live, but no, fuck, let's just build a whole bunch of big ass high rises. Potentially build a Freedom Tower with conveyor belts that people can ride from downtown.
Yeah, and the creepiest thing about the Hudson Yards project is that like the fact that it is for the ultra wealthy is not hidden. Like it is basically in the mission statement that this is a neighborhood specifically for the ultra wealthy.
Yeah,
and
it's
that
right there.
And this gets back to the importance of the Robert Moses reference in the chapter 22, because this is just the exact same thing. Like the city planners were able to put together for the ultra rich this like weird collection of blocks that are like the edges of 3 different neighborhoods that there's nothing really in except for bad like housing, which is where Windust is at, and that they could clear it out and just create a whole new neighborhood. The obvious sort of beacon of gentrification and like the evil of consumption that this whole thing represents, and the flaunting of wealth especially.
Yeah, this is not for anyone other than people with a ton of money.
No, but that it still needs to hold this like public base because it is technically going to be a neighborhood in New York City.
Yeah.
Which is just it makes my stomach feel bad.
Capitalism at its grossest.
Yeah, which gets to and they have like neighborhood rewards. There's a fucking Hudson Yard rewards thing on their website, which is like just that idea that it is just a ultra capitalist project is so evident if you're going to the point of having a rewards program for a neighborhood.
Yeah. It's
Um,
Pynchonian and it's batshit crazy.
yeah, it is Pynchonian in real life. A rewards program for a neighborhood? What are we doing? It's so nuts, and it gets into the fact that this is like this like it's a cycle, right? So you have Robert Moses, and then you have Rudy Giuliani, who's doing the same thing as Robert Moses did through his like
Mhm.
clean up the streets of New York thing that's in the background of this whole book, just all the gentrification, all the development. And then you have now, after Giuliani's tenure and all of that, the Hudson Yards project. Like it just keeps going in these cycles, which is a big thing that Pynchon writes about in all of his books.
Put something in a place where it doesn't benefit anybody but the people in power and the people with money, and then you convince the people that are being displaced by it that it's a good thing and that it's benefiting them in the long run. And yeah, you don't have to worry about, any consequences that are going to come of that, because at that point the people who are being displaced don't have any power or ability to overthrow it or take down whatever it is that's being put up in that place, and they just get moved off to the side. Whether it's, as far back as Mason and Dixon with, you know, the 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 colonizers coming in and clearing out the land and forcing the resettlement of all the people who lived here at the time, and that continues through Against the Day, that continues up through all the rest of his work. It's just this westward expansion, that we started on the East Coast, we moved west, we got all the way, we got all the land that we needed, and then we just backtracked back to the East Coast again, and the cycle starts all over again. Let's keep moving. It's exactly like you said. It is a cycle.
And I ask you, dear listeners, is it okay to be a Luddite? As they're going through the streets to get to this real crappy apartment building that he lives in, there's a mention of a police exercise going on at the Yavitz Center. And the cabbie suggests that perhaps they're doing a exercise where terrorists take over an auto show going on at the center, and what that would be like. It's potentially a reference here to the fact that there was a lot of military and police exercises going on in New York and the country before 9/11 and on the day of 9/11. Just if I was to read off a list of all of them, it'd be pretty extensive. It's just something that was going on, and so if again you're looking at this through a conspiratorial lens, then the city is kind of preparing to be on edge for something. Um, which, if you get back to again, I made a reference to this book a very long time ago, but the idea of 9/11 as mass ritual, that somehow all of these different disparate aspects have like brought about this event happening as a result of sort of some dark pact with evil forces, then it would make sense that a lot of this stuff would just kind of happen without planning. That book's crazy. That book is firmly outside the realm of possibility, but it does provide an interesting and like compelling sort of literary idea rather than anything in real life. But in real life, there was a lot of military and police exercises actively ongoing. So Maxine eventually gets to the apartment, and Windust is already basically playing games with her. She almost walks away. She almost gets away. Almost gets
Almost.
away. But then
So close.
he suddenly appears and says, I just wanted to see how long you'd be willing to wait before you turned around to look up
God, what a
to go away. I
asshole.
I hate it so much. And pages 258 and 259 in my edition are almost completely highlighted
Really?
because as much as obviously like this scene is like pretty like sad in the grander scheme of things from her as a character, the
Mhm.
writing in it is incredible.
It really is.
Um, yeah, the paragraph starting with desolate corridors, which is a description of the apartment building, is an amazing piece of writing from Pynchon.
Mhm.
Um, the actual sort of scene where the two of them have sex is written in a way that is very well done, very impactful for what it is. The like conversation between the two of them in bed or before they talk to one another when Maxine's just kind of like looking out the window is impeccably written. Yeah, there's very little of these two pages that isn't just highlighted in pink. Do you have any thoughts on the fact on their sex scene, or just that it happened?
It's unflinching in its uncomfortability.
Mhm.
Um, it you know, again, we talked earlier about how, as far as a character, you know, Maxine, I think is, you know, as frustrating as her actions and her choices are, it's in line with her character.
Yeah,
And I hate to say that this is too, because it's a hard reality to really grasp, but it is. It, you know, this sort of desperation that has been running through her, and this um, willingness and almost borderline eagerness to justify everything that has led up to this point, makes this scene, I you know, it for lack of a better term, it you know, it is an earned scene. Um, do I like it? No. It's a hard read. Um, but you know, this is exactly how this scene should have taken place. I think if it didn't happen, I think that's not being fair to the character, in the sense that it's not allowing them to fully have autonomy as a character. And I think to not portray it in the way in which it is portrayed is doing a disservice to the reader. So I think he handles it very well through this. You know, aside from the, as you mentioned, the really uh, beautiful prose that is here, I think this, as uncomfortable as this scene is, I think this is the scene that it needed to be.
yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely. Honestly, I'll just spoil it. It is my quote for later. Like
Yeah.
I can't think of another section from these chapters that I has as much meaning in it, and I'll get to that when we talk about it. But what do you think of Lester in the very Twin Peaksian
I
moment of
was,
their
thank
being
you.
escaped
Thank
from
you.
the power outlet and all of that?
That's the first thing that came to my mind, is this little aside about her looking at the electrical outlet is incredibly Twin Peaks. For those who haven't watched it, there is a major undercurrent, for lack of a better term, maybe pun intended, of of you. Everyone just heard me in real time realize that I made a really bad joke and caught myself doing it, which is
Perfect.
amazing.
Yeah.
There is, yeah, electricity plays a huge thematic role throughout Twin Peaks, not just in the show, but in the prequel movie and in the continuation of the show that came out in 2017. Um, it is, there's a lot to unpack from, as far as like what that could represent in that world. Um, in this context, I don't know that I could really pull too much out of it, other than it seems like a sort of a means of shocking Maxine back into reality, and you know, having her, that focus on this really mundane object, um, just kind of snaps her back into reality, and have a moment of really reassessing the situation. And it's sort of that, when you have this eagerness and this desire for something, and it overwhelms you to the point where you can't think of anything else, and then you get it, and the experience itself is so underwhelming, or so jarring, that once it's over, the sort of elation that existed around it comes crashing down so fast that there is a sort of weird tendency to hyperfixate on these sort of mundane things. And that was, I think, Maxine going through that in that section. But yeah, it definitely had a very like Dougie Jones feel to it,
Uh-huh.
for sure.
My least favorite element of season 3 of that show.
I don't think you're alone in that. I like Dougie. I will defend Dougie to an extent, but yeah,
Sure.
you're definitely not alone in that
Put him in
disdain for
2
him.
episodes. Does not need to be more than half of the season of that.
Yeah, it was a lot,
It
for
was a
sure.
lot, man.
Did you
Um,
pull anything else from that?
I
Oh,
did.
I read. I want to get your whole opinion on the whole scene, but yeah.
The whole scene. Yeah, I think so, like, there's a lot of parts of it, you know? Um, I I feel bad for admitting that it's also kind of sexy. Like, it isn't written in a like a explicitly like violent or like horrifying way, unlike some of the sex that does take place between Furnessy and Brock. like it is aggressive, but it's also clear that Maxine doesn't have a problem with that. That like
Yeah.
that's not, like breaking her enjoyment of it. And so, despite the fact that I understand the broader implications of like how bad it is that she's engaging with this guy, like there is also some part of me that if one of my girlfriends was telling me this story and they were heterosexual, I'd be like, okay, like I can understand, like I can understand,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
get
yeah.
it. I understand what you're saying, but like some of the descriptions in it, I think are like really, really impactful from a standpoint of showcasing like why she feels the way she does about this kind of like man, right? Like the sentence
Mhm.
in here that is just it's just mind blowing to me. The his hands, murderer's hands, are gripping her forcefully by the hips, exactly where it matters, exactly where some demonic set of nerve receptors she has been till now only semi-aware of have waited to be found and used like buttons on a game controller. Impossible for her to know if it's him moving or if she's doing it herself. Like, fucking Christ! Like, as
Yeah.
far as like a description of everything that is going on there, from the fact that this is a sexual encounter that she is very into, and selling that fact through the way that it's written. Also giving the reader the perspective of who this guy is by saying he has these murderer's
Murderer's
hands
hand, yeah.
that are gripping her, but they're activating these like nerve endings that she's never felt but thought she had. Like it's such an amazing sentence that encapsulates all of the elements of that scene from a standpoint of who he is, who she is, what the appeal is, and what the aftermath is. Like it's so well rendered in a way that again is not exploitive to any significant degree, is not a sex like I feel like a lesser writer would be like, oh, this guy's evil, even though Nicholas Windust is somewhat ambiguous at this point in the book, or a writer going, "This guy's done evil, if not is still evil." Maxine shouldn't be interested in him. I'm going to turn this into like a violent confrontation, or like God
Mhm.
forbid, a scene where she's assaulted instead of something
Yeah,
consensual. Like
exactly.
it takes restraint for an author not only to make it a consensual thing, but to be able to communicate all of the aspects of the emotions and um the kind of thought process that's taking place while it's happening. It's very impressive to me.
It's a
And
sign of a mature writer, like, this is a very mature
very,
writer
very mature writer.
handling this situation deftly. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And the way that it transitions to the Lester thing is another really good example of this sort of playing at all of the things at once. Because in my mind, Lester being there is almost like Maxine finally sort of getting to the end of the case with Lester. Like she found out who probably killed him. We
Mhm.
get Windus referred to as a murderer specifically. We know about his cologne, and so in a way, she's kind of found justice for that. And so the spirit of Lester can kind of properly pass on, but it's been residing with her murderer. And so there's a number of and like there's a number of different ways you can take that fact. You can then say that Maxine is the newest victim of Windust, if that's the interpretation you want to have on it, and that her victimization is what gives him the out to escape from. You can then offer a different interpretation where this scene where she sleeps with him is an example of her kind of providing him a way out of like, I'm going to come in here and distract him so you can leave. And so that's another maybe rationalization she's having in the moment of like, I'm doing this for the greater good, so to speak. um, you can bring a lot of different interpretations to what that particular escape of Lester means, but then for it to end with "and she cries out, though not exactly for Lester" is also a fucking perfect line, because
Mhm.
it is there clearly to indicate the sexual satisfaction that Maxine is receiving through calling out to Lester's murderer. but in the process of sort of watching his spirit finally get the chance to move on from this world, even though she couldn't save him when he was alive, she can at least like deliver his spirit to peace anyway. It's just it's so like there's so much that one can talk about, and all it is a fucking sex scene between two characters, and then just it makes me so frustrated with the sex scenes that are in a lot of other books by different authors
that are in
that
most
are
books by
just
other authors.
yeah, that's
I
fair.
would
They're in most books by other authors that are
I
just devoid of like meaning or purpose.
yeah, no, absolutely, because I as a reader, if even with authors that I like, if there is a sex scene coming up and I can tell it's about to happen, I immediately start to cringe because that is the kind of thing, that particular kind of scene is such a razor wire
Yeah.
um, balancing act that can go wrong so fast and so devastating that it can almost take me out of a book entirely. And thankfully, it is handled well here.
Mhm.
Because again, this is a mature writer handling this situation and doing it perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And again, it gets the point across without also being unnecessarily graphic. Like there is some
Mhm.
degree of description of what is going on. Certainly there are graphic mentions. You know, it does say like Maxine being wet, but it isn't to an extreme degree with anything. I don't know exactly what it looked like to watch the two of them fuck, and I don't need to know that because
Exactly.
the
Not that
purpose
kind of
of
book.
no, the purpose of the scene's insertion, pun not intended, is to bring a lot of these emotional aspects of the story to a head that have been building for like almost 100 pages now,
Yeah.
and it's an emotional climax again, but not intended, for where this character is at in her kind of journey through the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
excellent.
I mean, again, it's earned. I think that there's too many authors that fall into the pitfall of, just insert titillating scenes to do it. And
Mhm.
it doesn't serve the story, and it's just there to, you know, give the reader some, in I guess in the author's mind, some enjoyment that they think is gonna come of it. Maybe it does, but so often those scenes don't serve the story, and this does. And I, it as hard as it can be to read just because of the sort of primal description of it, it is very effective in doing what it does, and very effective at serving the story.
Have you ever seen a beet sitting on a plate insolently?
No, I can't say that I have.
As Maxine has.
Yeah. I have to wonder
After
what that experience is like.
after the event, so to speak, is over, she gets up and kind of walks around, and that's the description of what's in his fridge.
Yeah.
Um, and he comes in and he offers, like, "Do you want to have coffee?" And she goes, "Nah, I think I'm just gonna go." And so that's when Dust reveals that he's married. Um, Not a surprise,
No, not at
that
all.
it's sort of expected, I suppose. And so eventually Maxine decides to head out. Um, and I love the closing quote from this sort of moment in the book where it says, "Once inside a cab, he has not come downstairs to see her off and headed uptown. What? She's just able to mentally inquire of herself. Was I the fuck thinking?" And the worst, or does she mean the best part of it, that even right now, it will take very little. Yes, all pivoting here on FDR's silvery small cheekbone, in fact, to lean forward, interrupt the calling hate fest on the cabbie's radio, and in a voice sure to be trembling, asked to be brought back to the homicidal bagman and his dark savage squad for more of the same. It's it's such an amazing paragraph. Um,
It really is.
yeah, it's just yeah, I it's I
I mean,
like
again, this. this internalization of her of Maxine's this ongoing feud with herself in a sense
Yeah.
is so engaging and so gripping as a reader. Like it's one thing to just explain that this character is upset with themselves for doing what they did, and they're thinking about it on the way home. But the way that it is portrayed here, this specifically the what she is able to just mentally inquire of herself, was I the fuck thinking? That is
Mhm.
such a cool sentence on just a word to word and punctuation level. That is a really interesting and effective way to describe her thought process at that time.
Very true. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and then just that depiction of, like, the way her mind immediately swings back of, like,
Mhm.
Nah, I could do that again."
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could do that again right now, actually.
Yeah.
It really makes me wish that we had gotten a novel about Frenesi instead of Zoid, honestly.
Maybe this stemmed from that. Maybe it was,
Yeah.
it was a desire to take it and what if I had done it with that kind of a character and focused on that character instead?
Mhm.
Who knows?
I could definitely see that he's developing stuff that he already kind of came up with or wrote about, for sure. That depiction of, like, women and powerful men have been in a lot of his books. It's in Law 49, it's in Gravity's Rainbow, it's in this, it's flipped in Inherent Vice, but it's still there. It's in Vineland. It's something that he's been working on for a long time, and it seems like Bleeding Edge is really where he's kind of perfected how to tell that sort of a character arc.
Mhm.
Yeah, in a way that I'm very impressed by. Once Maxine gets back to her office, uh, she starts going through the folder that Windows had given her, and there is what Pynchon writes as, there are all these suddenly fascinating fringe chores to be done, sorting the
Mhm.
sponges under the sink by size and color, running a head cleaner tape through the VCR, going through the takeout menus for excess duplication, just trying as hard as she possibly can to, like, avoid going any further into this.
Yep.
That's just such a good depiction of anxiety, I think.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and so when she finally goes through, she learns that Gabriel Ice is Jewish. She also learns that he is continuing to be instrumental in what is put as an illegal transfer of millions of US dollars to an account in Dubai, controlled by the Wahhabi Trans Religious Friendship Fund, or WTF. Um, WTF is also Whiskey Tango Foxtrot in
Mhm.
military alphabet, which was what was in the room beneath Gabriel Ice's home. So to me, that seems to say that the WTF is actually just this 9/11 operation. Um, and she's going into, like, the name of it. If you're not familiar with, like, Wahhabi, that's a sort of type of fundamentalist Islamic sort of belief. Um, and so she is going through here and continuing to wonder sort of like what this really matters about. There's all of these different attempts to follow the money through the Hawala that she already knew existed, and they can't figure out where it's going or it's being used for. They seem to have covers for how they're spending their money. And then finally, we get to what is possibly the scariest thing in this book, where it says recommendations for action and runs down the usual list of sanctions against hashslingers, withdrawal of security clearance, prosecution, cancellation of outstanding contracts, and a disturbing footnote, option X, consult manual. Like, that has so much history and, like, sort of implication, like dark implications attached
Mhm.
to it, that it has to be like looking at like a black hole on the page of, like, we have this other option that we can take, and it's clear that this is the option that they have taken. And then she asks herself why Windust would want to show her this. The probability of a setup continues to increase. Close to dawn, she finds herself in a dream rerun of Now Voyager, 1942, in which versions of Paul Henreid as Jerry and Betty Davis as Charlotte are about to take another smoke break. As always, Jerry suavely puts 2 cigarettes in his mouth and lights them both, but this time, as Charlotte expectantly reaches for hers, Jerry keeps them both in his mouth, continuing to puff away, beaming pleasantly, sending up huge clouds of smoke, though there's only a couple of soggy cigarette butts hanging off his lower lip. In her reverse shots, Charlotte is seen to grow more and more anxious. Oh, oh well, of course, if you, Maxine comes away screaming, under the impression that there is something in bed with her. What do you think about her dream? We've taken. I think this is our 4th stop for dream interpretation in
Yeah.
this book.
And open up a
What do you-
side job doing dream interpretation for people.
Yeah. What do you think of this dream?
So at first I wasn't really sure how I felt about it. I'm not familiar with that movie. I like Betty Davis, and I don't know how I haven't seen that one. But the Pynchon wiki mentions it as a foreshadowing in 9/11, which it taken in that context, I can see that, especially with, he's got these 2 cigarettes in his mouth, and watching the actual clip from the film where that doesn't happen. But he does light the 2 cigarettes for her. They are, very clearly close together, and you have these huge clouds of smoke. So it very much falls in line with that idea of that this is foreshadowing. As with so many of her other dreams at this point, and other instances in this book have, it's basically a portent of things to come.
Yeah, I think that's pretty well like the best way to interpret it is that, especially the fact that it's not exactly what happens in the movie. He doesn't smoke both cigarettes in her face, and then the room fills with smoke. It does seem to be that, like, potentially her mind is closing in on the answers that she's looking for, but
Yeah.
she hasn't quite figured out what it actually means. It is that this if you go through like the Wikipedia information on like what the movie's about, there is a potential like thing to be said here about how it's about 2 people who kind of fall in love and become sexually intimate, but then like deliberately try not to see each other again. You could like spin that out to being maybe this is why she's thinking about the movie in her subconscious because of her and Windust. But I think the easiest way to look at what the interpretation is just that, yeah, the cigarettes are the Twin Towers and they're about to be on fire.
Yeah.
After that, oh, and a reminder: clean the heads on your VCR. Make sure you get
that's
make sure
very
you get a head
important.
cleaner tape in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love this opening line of the after the page break on 262 where it says, having lately discovered in the yuppie collector's market a credulity that may be limitless, a gang of cigar forgers have been working out of a smoke shop on West 30th, offering smuggled Cuban cigars for $20 a pop, an attractive price for the time, along with a line of rare antique cigars, including alleged selections from J.P. Morgan's private stock, originally chewed on props from Groucho Marx movies, and cigar incunabula such as Christopher Columbus's first Cuban, mentioned by De las Casas in Historia de las Indias. Incredibly, these fakes are all fetching their asking prices, and a boutique hedge fund in town has been paying these knockoff artists huge sums, writing it off to travel and entertainment, and taking what the media can get a hold of to be called lavish kickbacks. I love the fact that occasionally Pynchon reminds us that she still has like a regular job.
Yeah.
Like this isn't just what she does all the time. Like this is just one case of many that she's kind of going down. And so whenever we get a look into one of these other cases that she's dealing with, like these weird cigar forgers,
It's more and more bizarre and outlandish
yeah,
that these things exist.
yeah, definitely. I love it. So she she is going through all of that. And then it says one morning, a couple days later, Maxine is just getting comfortable with this perennially active ticket, and Daytona comes in, shaking her head back and forth. Her eyes angle downward and to the right, recalling a neurolinguistic workshop she once attended in Atlantic City. Maxine observes, "You're talking to yourself again." She gets a call shortly after that from Windust, where they talk about the contents of the folder, where, you know, there's again a lot of this sort of basic anti-Semitism that kind of runs through a lot of conspiracy theories here. I think that there are some people who could read this book and could come away from the idea that like Pynchon is kind of saying that the Israelis were responsible for 9/11. Like there is a way to twist that into this book's narrative, but I think instead a lot of the Jewishness of this book from a standpoint of like concern that Mossad's up to something, or that Avi's a double agent, he's gonna get after whatever this conspiracy I've uncovered is, and Gabriel Ice is also Jewish. Oh my god. I think
Mhm.
this comes from more of a commentary on the fact that usually for some reason the Jews are involved in every conspiracy theory, and that's just sort of like always been a thing and will probably always be a thing. And in the same
Unfortunately, yeah.
way, yeah, and which makes my life real fun. Um, and in the same way that like Maxine's father mentions how stupid it is that Windust is still upset about like communists in Hollywood, is like still working over that territory. I think this is another example of Windust just having old opinions, or like real time worn opinions, that he also thinks that there must be something anti-Semitic going on, or rather a conspiracy that has to do with the Jews. He's just as prone to the anti-Semitism as everybody else.
Mhm.
And then their conversation sort of ends up closing out with a weird aside where we learn that the children, Misha and Grisha, have just graduated the Civil Hacker School in Moscow. It looks like you did some research on this, Cody.
Yeah, that actually might be based on a real thing. I found an article from 2009 in foreignpolicy.com that it literally is titled "Inside a Russian Hacker School." So basically, this guy starting around 96 started this. It's literally called Civil Hacker School. The students have to pass an entrance exam. They had about 10,000 people apply for admission between 96 and 2009, and very few ever managed to actually get into it, despite them having all kinds of credentials and skill sets that would normally get you into that kind of thing. Apparently, only a few dozen students are enrolled at a time. It's totally free. It's all like there's donations from unnamed sources, as it says that this comes from. So it's a very shady, obviously, situation that's going on here. But absolutely, this is based in reality. It's operated under the guy that ran it. Said that it was. He said, "I simply help ordinary citizens learn self-defense in cyberspace."
Yeah,
Which
that sounds right.
sure, you're being super selective about who's allowed to come into your cyber school, and yeah, that's what you're doing. So I wouldn't be surprised if this article or this particular thing, which was apparently run out of a small grungy Moscow apartment, was the impetus for this mention in here at the end of the chapter.
Yeah, I would believe that 100%. There's no way Pynchon hasn't read that article.
Yeah, and it also in the subtitle it says a bronze Buddha statue rests on an altar. So just like Sean had his little cast iron Buddha, there's always a
Yeah,
Buddha.
there's always a Buddha somewhere. Is there anything else from chapter 24 you wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think I had anything else.
Okay. Well, that brings us to funny parts. Was there any funny parts that we didn't cover as we went through?
I did really enjoy another dig at the Knicks that was in here, where they mentioned that some of the deep web ad revenue includes Knicks tickets.
Yeah,
Right now it's weapons, drugs, sex, Knicks tickets. Which, you always gotta get a dig at the Knicks in some.
you have to. Spike Lee buys up all the tickets. How are you
Yeah.
supposed to be able to get one but through the dark web? So that brings us to quotes. Do you want to read yours?
Yeah, I'm gonna go. As you mentioned, between 258 and 259, there's a lot.
A lot of good
Pull
shit in
from.
there.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna go with right before what I think you mentioned you're gonna do. Starting with desolate corridors. Desolate corridors, unswept and underlit, that stretch on for longer than the building's outside dimensions would suggest. Walls glisten unhealthily in creepy yellows, grime-infected greens, colors of medical waste, open to all sorts of penetration besides the squatters who now and then step out into a light sight line and immediately back, like targets in a first-person shooter. Carpeting has been removed from the hallways. Leaks are not being fixed. Paint hangs. Fluorescent bulbs on borrowed time buzz purplishly overhead. According to Windust, wild dogs live in the basement and begin to come out at sundown to roam the halls. Brought in originally to intimidate the last tenants into moving out. Left on site to fend for themselves as soon as the Alpopil outgrew the relocation budget. There is like the description of this apartment is just so, it's so beautiful, but it also there's this sort of foreshadowing that's going on with the, open to all sorts of penetration besides the squatters who now and then step out, and the description of them stepping out into a sightline and immediately back like targets in a first person shooter.
Yeah.
That is so, again, this is another thing that in the hands of a less skilled author, that description would come off as clunky and ham-fisted, but here it's absolutely beautiful. And the fluorescent bulbs on borrowed time buzz purplishly overhead. Oh my god, just such beautiful description of a horrendous thing to actually see.
Yeah. Well, I think the other really, really intelligent thing in that you're bringing up with the first person shooter mentions all of that is that before the book started, that doesn't make any sense. At the start of the book,
the prologue that didn't exist.
At the start of the book, Maxine doesn't describe anything like a video game. But
No.
now that she has interacted with the deep web, has interacted with virtual reality, has interacted with these sort of games from the beginning of the book, she has the ability in her monologue to point out those overlaps. And it shows her development in the character through the fucking narration. Like, I don't know if I've ever read a book by an author who's managed to do that. Whereas, like,
I don't think I have.
the stuff this character has learned in this book is affecting their narration of the book. Like,
it impacts the way the story is told.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's also, again, something that you may not notice. That, like, if you're not paying attention, if the reader's just going through it, then, like, they'll read that first-person shooter description, and then they go, "Oh, yeah, well, that makes sense." But that doesn't give that inclusion, like, the full credit that it is due. It's so impressive. Like, it's so good. This is so good. It's one of Pynchon's best. Like,
Really,
it's yeah.
it really, like, I know we're halfway through at this point, but this read through of it, which I think is my third now, and obviously I think in large part due to the conversations that we've had between four of us, like, has really made my appreciation for it grow. I was never one that really hated on it as much as other people did, but it was never, I would never have called it my favorite. I still don't think I would call it my favorite, but my respect and my admiration for what is in here has drastically increased since we started rereading it.
I'm glad to hear that. My quote also comes from 258, where it starts by saying, "Shouldn't she be saying, you know what, fuck yourself, you'll have more fun,' and walking out? No. Instead, instant docility. She slides to her knees, quickly without further discussion, not that some bed would have been a better choice. She has joined months of unvacuumed debris on the rug, face on the floor, ass in the air, skirt pushed up. Windust's not exactly manicured nails ripping methodically at sheer taupe pantyhose. It took her easily 20 minutes in Saks not so long ago to decide on. And his cock is inside her with so little inconvenience that she must have been wet without knowing it. His hands, murderer's hands, are gripping her forcefully by the hips, exactly where it matters, exactly where some demonic set of nerve receptors she has been till now only semi-aware of have waited to be found and used like buttons on a game controller. Impossible for her to know if it's him moving or if she's doing it herself. Not a distinction to be lingered on till much later, of course, if at all, though in some circles it is held to be something of a big deal. Down on the floor, nose level with an electrical outlet, she imagines for a second she can see some great brightness of power just behind the parallel slits. Something scurries at the edge of her vision, the size of a mouse, and it is Lester Trapes, the shy, wronged soul of Lester, in need of sanctuary, abandoned. not least by Maxine. He stands in front of the outlet, reaches in, parts the sides of one slit like a doorway, glances back apologetically, slides into the annihilating brightness. Gone. She cries out, though not for Lester exactly. I mean, it's just, it's again, from a writing standpoint, it's amazing, that inclusion of her getting down on the ground and her being amongst all of the unvacuumed debris of like an untold number of months is a genius way to describe that. Then just the difference in her, again, like preparing herself for him, like the flashback to how long she spent shopping just for these pantyhose that he rips. Like it's just, it's an incredible piece of prose that is describing something that is both equally upsetting and, again, like, I hate to admit it, like, kind of titillating to the reader.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really well done. And then just to end with that interplay of, she's given Lester some sanctuary now, either because she's finally figured out what happened to him, or that she's distracted his killer long enough for his spirit to hide, is, oh, it's great. It's great. Love it. It's excellent. Might be the best sex scene ever written. Other than perhaps some of the ones in Lady Chatterley's Lover. That's a close tie, probably. Do you have the most Pynchon part of the chapter, Cody?
You know, I've been thinking on this all week. Like, there's a lot I could pull from. There really is. I think in the course of discussing these chapters, what I've landed on is the mention of MK Ultra and the use of the time traveling kids and sending them back and having them essentially edit history at the will and whim of their controllers and their handlers. I think in a really interesting kind of weird way in my brain, I can see that as being a way of sort of explaining Pynchon's sort of alternate history that he plays with throughout his books. If we kind of think of it as, these people, these agents that are going through history and sort of changing things and the effect that would have on those timelines and how they would branch out from there, or how they would sort of separate themselves from the main timeline and create these sort of alternate timelines, could explain in a sense how he's kind of painting this sort of alternate history of America that he's been working on throughout his career.
That's a really cool idea conceptually. Yeah, I will choose to adopt that belief, even if it'll never be confirmed by Thomas Pynchon.
I keep saying he needs. If he just sends us an email, he can answer all our questions. Thomas Pynchon, send us an email.
Yeah, because that's a really neat concept. That the reason why this world is slightly different than the one we live in is because of these strange Montauk agents being sent back in time. I like that. It's a very cool idea. And it's not an easy choice from these chapters.
I know. There's a lot.
I don't know. I think I would have to once again go with probably the sex scene between the two of them.
That's fair, yeah.
The way that incorporates thematic territory that Pynchon has been working on for a very long time, basically his whole career, and then also with the different like emotional elements, the way that we watch her character develop and her thought process through it, and the stuff with Lester at the end of its description. Like, I can't think of another author who I think would be capable of doing all of that in like a page and a half. All right, well, we do have a comment from a YouTube listener. Did you want to read that out, Cody?
Sure. So this is from
good look on the name.
Satwik Mishra 2312. I apologize. I probably butchered that name. It says, "Thank you so much for this. This is, I think, in reference to one of the Mason and Dixon episodes that we did. I just started my Pynchon journey and found this goldmine of a channel of yours. Please continue making these videos. I'd also love for you guys to cover Against the Day. Thanks again." So thank you. We will cover Against the Day, as we will cover all of the other books in Pynchon's bibliography. I will say that is the one I am most excited to get to. So definitely looking forward to that. As much of an undertaking as that is going to be, I really do look forward to that. I think that there's a lot to pull from that book, and I'm glad you're enjoying the Mason and Dixon episodes, and eventually you'll get to Bleeding Edge and hear this, and hopefully you're enjoying Bleeding Edge up to this point.
Hi, from whenever you listen
Hello
to this.
from the past.
From potentially years past, depending upon what you're interested
order
in
you're
reading
going
Bleeding
through,
Edge is. Yeah. That will bring us to the end of chapters 22, 23, and 24. Next week, we'll be covering chapters 25, 26, 27. All four of us should be here for that, I believe.
Actually, I just realized next week is Father's Day, so we're taking a week
That's
off,
right.
and then
We're taking a week off.
back. Yeah.
Yes. So fathers, enjoy your day.
Yes.
For all of you that exist. Yes, so we will be back in over a week, 2 weeks time. That's how that measurement is made.
That maths, yeah.
Math is not my strong suit. It should surprise nobody that I was an English kid. If you think this show is worth $1, then we would love to have it. If you'd like to support the show, we do have a website on Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/mappingthezone. Any funds that we receive are going to be used to pay for hosting fees, upgrade like equipment we may get, basically anything to help make this show run. So it is just to help with any expenses we may encounter as a program. Additionally, we do still have a survey that you can fill out. We announced it on Twitter. And in last week's episode, we are just wanting to get some feedback from all of the listeners as far as what you think of the show, whether or not there's anything that you think we could improve in, stuff like that. We'd love it if you could fill that out. We'll have links to both of those in the show notes here. We have an email address, mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. We are also at twitter.com/PynchonPod. And we are also on Instagram at Mapping the Zone Podcast. And before I make any other weird audio gaffes, thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye. Have you ever looked up Hunter S. Thompson's daily routine? I don't remember where I first heard this before, but someone from the Associated Press went to go interview him, and he or she or they just followed him around for the whole day. And the schedule that they put out there is 3 p.m. he wakes up, 3:05 p.m. 3:05 p.m. he gets the day going with some cocaine. Or I'm sorry, no.
Jesus Christ.
He fucked this up. At 3:05, he gets his day going with some Chivas Regal while reading the morning papers, and he has a Dunhill cigarette. At 3:45, he does cocaine.
Okay, well, at least he waits a little bit.
He's got to get up to a bit of an even level.
Yeah, you got to pace yourself.
Yeah. 3:45 is when he does cocaine. 3:50 he takes down another glass of Chivas, has another cigarette. 4:05 he has his first cup of coffee and a cigarette. 4:15 he does cocaine. 4:16 he drinks a glass of orange juice, which I assume is his breakfast, and he smokes a cigarette. Which also, cigarettes to orange juice, I don't.
No,
that can't be a good combination.
No, it can't.
4:30 does cocaine. 4:54 does cocaine. 5:05.
God.
5:05 does cocaine. So that's just a solid, almost hour of cocaine usage. 5:11 he has another cup of coffee and another cigarette. The quantity of stimulants in this man's body.
I was about to say.
At 5:11.
No wonder he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
At 5:30, he pours himself more Chivas, but adds more ice to it. At 5:45, he does cocaine again. At 6 p.m., he smokes a cigarette to take the edge off. He takes the edge off of his day 3 hours into it.
And he hasn't done anything yet beyond drinking a few things and doing a copious amount of cocaine.
So he smokes grass for an hour and 5 minutes, and at 7:05 he leaves to go to the Woody Creek Tavern for lunch, where he drinks a Heineken, 2 margaritas. He then eats 2 cheeseburgers, 2 orders of fries, a plate of sliced tomatoes, coleslaw, a taco salad, a double order of onion rings, a slice of carrot cake, ice cream, and has a bean fritter. Then he smokes some cigarettes, he drinks another Heineken, does cocaine, and then for the ride home, he has a snow cone, which is a glass of shredded ice over which is poured 3 or 4 jiggers of Chivas.
Holy God.
That is an insane meal to eat every single day.
How did he live? He was like almost 70, wasn't he?
When he killed himself?
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
I think he was 68 or 69.
60s. Yeah, late 60s. Jesus.
Yeah. So after lunch, he does cocaine at 8 p.m. He does cocaine for 2 hours because the next thing on his schedule is 10 p.m. when it says drops acid. Then at 11, he starts drinking chartreuse, and he starts doing more cocaine, and he's smoking a joint. Drinking just chartreuse on its own, that can't be a great time.
I cannot even wrap my head around like how a person can function.
Yeah, or just like live.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's insane.
He does that for 30 minutes, and he was drinking chartreuse and doing cocaine and smoking weed. At 11:30 he just goes to cocaine. He does cocaine for a half hour until midnight when it says Hunter is now ready to write. And then he writes from 12:05 to 6 in the morning. And it says chartreuse, cocaine, grass, Chivas, coffee, Heineken, clove cigarettes, grapefruit, Dunhill's, orange juice, gin. And then at 6 a.m., it says in the hot tub, champagne, Dove bars, and fettuccine Alfredo. Which is a meal and a half.
Eating fettuccine Alfredo in a bathtub might be the most unhinged part of all of this so far.
It's a hot tub, but it's not much
hot
better.
Tub, I'm sorry.
He hasn't quite sunk down to the level of doing this in the bathtub yet.
Good Lord.
I think that the worst part about that to me is the fact that it says Dove bars, plural. He's having multiple Dove bars.
On top of the 2 cheeseburgers he had earlier in the day.
And the taco salad.
And the taco salad. And I'm assuming at this point, close to a pound of cocaine.
Something like that. Has to be. He's having that feast in his hot tub for 2 hours. And then at 8 a.m. he takes a Halcyon, which I guess is a sleeping pill. And then he falls asleep at 8:20. And he sleeps until 3 p.m.
Oh, God.
The amount of stimulants that sleeping pill is able to overcome to put this man to sleep makes me wonder how strong that is.
It's got to be like a horse tranquilizer or something.
Yeah. Just something nuts. It's apparently used to treat insomnia.
Well, I mean, when you're doing that much cocaine and drinking that much coffee and eating fettuccine Alfredo in a hot tub for 2 hours.
It's technically a controlled substance and a narcotic because it's a benzo.
That's unbelievable.
Look at this. Can cause paranoid or suicidal ideation and impair memory, judgment, and coordination. Combining with other substances, particularly alcohol, can slow breathing and possibly lead to death.
I can't. Yeah, that's just wild.
It's really something.
I don't know
That
that
is
I'd want, like I don't think I'd wanna spend time with him knowing that that's his day and knowing how many guns he had access to, like, at all times.
he seems to have somehow been responsible despite all of that.
Evidently.
Yeah. Um, there was a Conan O'Brien was, like, the only talk show host to manage to interview him, I believe,
That sounds about right.
and, like, they had 2 different interviews, and the first one, Hunter S. Thompson refused to come on the show and demanded that Conan O'Brien come see him,
Oh,
and
that's right. I do
they
remember
went
that.
shooting and drinking, and
Yeah.
there was, like, a bartender out there with them making drinks for them at, like, this portable bar.
I saw that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's very crazy to witness. Just
Yeah.
Hunter S.
That
Thompson needing
was
to push his glass of bourbon out of the way to fire a machine gun.
that was back in '97. Yeah.
Wow, it's crazy.
Absolutely wild. I'm gonna have to watch that again. Oh, man.
Yeah, I'd read that before, but I was, um, reading it out to one of my friends the other day, and I was like, I should really tell Cody about this.
Feel like I was gonna have a heart attack just listening to everything that he was doing.
Yeah, sounds like that is what a lifetime worth of drug abuse, uh, turns up as in tolerance is really what that seems like.
Yeah. I can't imagine he had any sort of, um, like, septum left after a while of doing that because that's a tremendous amount of cocaine, and
I
you don't
believe
get to
that.
doing that amount in a short period of time. You build up
Mhm.
to that.
Mhm. That takes a long time of tolerance to be doing coke for 2 hours.
Yeah, it's a dedication that I don't imagine many people have.
Yeah, 100%. Shane Carruth is an interesting filmmaker. His other movie,
He's
Upstream
upstream
Color, was
color,
also
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, that was a really,
Very
really
different, but
very, very
very
different. Yes.
I want that guy to make another movie. It's been a really long time
Well,
since he
he
made a
got
movie.
himself into a lot of trouble, so I don't know that that's going to happen.
Yeah,
So,
that's also true.
but yeah, he claims he's working on something that once he finishes, he's going to retire from filmmaking, which I don't know. We'll see if it ever happens. He's a
Yeah,
talented filmmaker. I'll definitely
he
give
is.
him that.
He sure is. I'm gonna have to look up these shoes now.
And I am, I'm not one to talk about shoes because I generally wear the same pair of Converse All Stars for years on end until they just can't be worn anymore. I don't see them like
That makes a lot of sense based upon what I know about you.
I had one pair of All Stars in high school, and I wore them down until the sole was literally coming off right before I graduated.
Wow,
Clothes have just never been my thing. They're functional, and that's as far as I go with them.
that's entirely fair. That's all they absolutely have to be.
Yeah, I get people are into the fashion stuff, and that's cool. I look at these shoes and I'm like, okay, but why that much?
Well, if
But
they're
what do I know?
handmade, I can
If they're
understand
handmade,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that's a big part of it. But I would not pay that much for them. I can buy a pair of All Stars for $50 and be good for at least a couple of years.
Would you pay that much if it was Daniel Day-Lewis shoes that he's apparently making
Ooh,
now?
is he still doing that? I remember he quit
Apparently
acting
that's
for a
what
while to do that.
apparently he was retiring to do that. Like he
Yeah,
just wants to make shoes now.
I mean, dude can do what he wants to do. I'm not going to stand in his way of his dreams, as weird as that is. But hey,
He wants to cobble.
he does that in Italy, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Which
So
I guess that
if you could get a pair of shoes made by Daniel Day-Lewis for 1,400
would I?
bucks, would you buy those?
$1,400? I don't. If someone gave them to me, I don't know that I'd wear them. I don't like those kind of shoes. those dress shoes. I've never liked.
Okay, but everywhere you went, Cody, you could
But
say
that's
that
true.
Daniel Day-Lewis made your shoes.
And I would have to. I'd have to justify that cost by just stopping people on the street and saying, "Hey, do you like these shoes? Daniel Day-Lewis made them for me." Until I'm put into an asylum where I clearly belong. So yeah, I guess to answer your question in a roundabout way, I would. Sure.
Can you imagine if some guy approached you on the street who I presume you haven't changed any other part of your wardrobe? You're just wearing these shoes.
Jeans and a t-shirt still.
Yeah. Some guy approached you just went, "Hey, do you like these shoes? Daniel Day-Lewis made them." Oh my god.
Be a real power move, I think. Have to like grab them by the shoulder and like really make sure they look.
Oh my god, that would be like the interaction between Key and Peele at the crosswalk, that sketch they did for that show. Just you're suddenly visited by some unhinged lunatic screaming about their shoes.